Chapter 121, Life is Precious, and love is precious too. If it's for freedom, why can't I have all three? John, who had nearly died, felt overwhelmed. There had been so many twists this time, but in the end, things had turned out well. Nagini's soul, however, was incomplete. She couldn't walk. John had made her a wheelchair and arranged for her to rest at Belby Manor. He didn't know whether the blood curse had a preservation effect, but when he asked, Nagini, who should have been a grandmother, still looked like she was in her 20s. If the transformation into a snake weren't part of the price, women across the wizarding world would be clamoring for the curse. Rubbing his shoulders, John told Damo Alex to take care of Nagini, then prepared to return to school. Even without explicit orders, Damo Alex would treat Nagini like his own mother. That was the blood curse, an affliction every wizard believed unsolvable, and John had broken it. The second Merlin first-class medal seemed to call to Damo Alex. If anyone harmed Nagini, even Lord Voldemort himself, Damo Alex would be ready to duel them, even with Avada Kedavra. Ding, mission complete. Obtained +1 any point. Soulwalker, wandering between life and death, possessing a deathly hallow allows entry into the ethereal illusion. John apparated back to Hogsmeade. He had left in the morning and returned near sunset. There was still time to wander, but he wasn't in the mood. He went into Honeyduke's and bought a dozen chocolates. After eating them, his pale, bloodless face finally looked a little better. His earlier pallor had been so extreme the Honeyduke's owner had almost called him a vampire. My hand is a bit unresponsive. Is it because my soul is weak? His right hand trembled even as he held chocolate, and John felt helpless. He'd need to rest. After finishing his daily charms at sunset, he returned to Hogwarts. The right hand showed no immediate improvement, but fortunately he could wield his wand with his left. He sank into the common room and slept hard. When he woke, it was past dinner. He ambled down to the kitchens. The house elves were used to him arriving late. "Sir, what can I get you?" an elf asked. "Meat, steak, preferably." A moment later, a steak was presented like a treasure. He ate it slowly and felt the strength return. But as he finished, his expression shifted from relief to alarm. He asked for a slice of apple pie. He took a bite and realized his face had gone ashen. He had lost his sense of taste. He hadn't noticed while eating the chocolates because he'd been in a hurry. Now, everything in his mouth had texture but no flavor. It was like chewing wax. He finished the pie mechanically and left, deathly pale. The price of saving that person had been too high. He sat in the common room a long time before he accepted it. To take away a foodie's sense of taste, death, you are truly cruel. John clenched his fist, dark thoughts churning. An idea flashed through his mind. Maybe he should collect the Deathly Hallows and drag death itself up here for a beating. Chapter 139, Murder and Talent. In the Great Hall, John chewed a piece of dry, tasteless bread with one hand. Malfoy had gone home, and Daphne had been called back by Mr. Greengrass. Slytherin felt emptier and quieter than usual. Heinrich, spreading jam on his own bread, set it to John's left. "Aren't you going to ask?" he said. John glanced at him, surprised Heinrich didn't seem to find anything odd about his hand. "At Durmstrang," Heinrich replied calmly, "wizards often damage themselves and don't realize it." Heinrich's golden eyes peeked out from under messy black hair. His pale, handsome face looked a little sickly, and he seemed used to such things. He sat down and quietly served John. John frowned. "We're friends, Heinrich," he said. Heinrich paused. The eyes hidden by his hair darkened for a moment. "To me, you're the brilliant light Edgar chased his whole life," he said earnestly. John was silent. He had thought Heinrich's talk of following was only about the Constellation Society, but there was more to it than that. "Then I'll watch your back," John said, serious. A small smile crossed Heinrich's sickly face. He placed his right hand over his chest as if swearing an oath. "Behind you there will always be a shadow named Heinrich Edgar," John chuckled. "Even so, that doesn't stop us being friends, does it?" Heinrich looked surprised, and warmth spread through him. "Those who meddle with forbidden things must pay a price. An eye, an arm, a leg, or life. Compared to that, losing his sense of taste didn't seem so grave. At least his face and nose were intact. Right, Lord Voldemort?" Professor Lupin was on holiday, which made John's life a little easier. Lupin's eyes were sharp, and John suspected Lupin already knew something. After a tasteless breakfast, John went to Snape's office. Snape had concluded John had found the werewolf, so it was only right Snape should explain himself. John was also curious about the depth of Snape's hatred for Lupin. Even without knowing their history, the intensity was palpable, as if Lupin had stolen something from Snape. He knocked, and the door was pushed open abruptly. Snape stood there, face dark, and sneered when he saw John. Snape moved aside to let him in, and the door slammed shut behind John. Snape strode to his desk, voice stiff. "Sit." Snape's mood was foul. He pulled a bag from a drawer and opened it. There were potion tools inside, and prominently, a bottle of veritaserum. John tensed, forced a laugh. "Professor, surely that's not necessary?" Snape's sneer deepened. "If your lips were sealed, I'd never have heard a single rumor all this time." So Snape intended to make him drink veritaserum. John understood Snape's anger. Awkwardly scratching his head, he asked, "Is this because of Professor Lupin?" At the name, Snape exuded cold fury. John had guessed they had a past, but it was deeper than he'd imagined, towering resentment. John, swallowing, tried to edge toward the bag to roll it back. Snape slapped his hand away. John winced. "You have a grudge against Lupin?" John asked, trying to keep the question light. Snape's cheek twitched. He stared hard into John's eyes. "What if your so-called good professor was once involved in a murder?" "Murder?" John was stunned. Remus Lupin? In his experience, Lupin didn't strike as a murderer. Snape, however, didn't seem willing to elaborate. "He's a dangerous man, John Wick," Snape said coldly. John met Snape's scrutiny without flinching. "If that's true, I know how to handle it, but first I'll investigate." John stood, inclining his head with the proper deference reserved for the head of house, and left. Snape watched him go, his dark eyes lingering on the right hand that hung useless at John's side. The way it drooped must have told him something. The professor's face tightened with curiosity and suspicion, but he said nothing as John retreated down the corridor. John hadn't expected Snape's reaction. He'd put all his cards on the table, and hearing that Lupin might be involved in a murder was something he hadn't counted on. He rubbed his chin and thought it over. On the one hand, there had been an underling who dared point a wand at Johnny Silverhand. On the other, a respected professor might be tied to a killing. The contrast only made Lupin's role harder to parse. Forgetting the original story was proving a real nuisance. He cursed his own lack of foresight. After transmigrating, he'd barely thought about the books and films. He'd been too busy surviving. 11 years had passed since then, and his memories of the finer points had thinned to fog. Holidays, he grumbled, never gave him a moment's rest. Azkaban escapee, animagus, soul surgery, dementors, death, and now apparently murder. He'd been run ragged all year. His right hand still needed treatment. The Room of Requirement offered little on souls, but Gryffindor's trunks and the common room had plenty on healing magic. He brewed a potion with the last of his unicorn horn. The milk-white liquid swirled in the silver cup, and John drank it with the same blank expression he wore for everything these days. Taste was something he rarely registered now. He suspected that even if someone set a heap of revolting things before him, he might not react. Whatever. The potion steadied his hand. It no longer trembled so badly. But the unicorn horn was nearly spent. He usually saved a little to make a draught for Nagini as well. Now only a sliver less than a finger's width remained. He needed more. Unicorn parts were rare, even on the black market in Nocturne Alley. Fortunately, he had a reliable supplier, Hagrid. With the Forbidden Forest as his backyard, Hagrid had access to strange and useful things when luck was on his side. John decided to try Hagrid's luck today. Outside, the sky had gone leaden. A light drizzle threatened snow. When he reached the hut, he saw two animals padding toward it, a large ginger Tom and a scruffy cat with a flat face. Tom and Crookshanks. So they'd come to play with Fang. John smiled despite himself and knocked on the door. He heard the heavy, uneven footsteps before the wood gave. The door swung open, and Hagrid filled the frame, his cheeks flushed, a pink handkerchief clutched to his nose. John recognized the sound even before he saw the rag. Hagrid was crying again. "John, have you heard?" Hagrid blurted as soon as he saw him, and then, as if losing control of his emotions, he wrapped John in a crushing bear hug. John felt ribs protest under the weight and had to wrench an arm free. "Hagrid, let go," he protested. Hagrid held tight, hiccuping into the handkerchief. John thought, absurdly, that no matter how much he trained, Hagrid could still flatten him like a pancake. It had been 3 years since he'd seen the groundskeeper so reduced, and the sight of him like this made a small, unexpected ache blossom in John's chest. Before John could ask what had happened, Hagrid managed to blurt the news through sobs. The specifics tumbled out between sniffles and sentences, and although John tried to sort them then and there, the truth was he had more pressing needs. Unicorn horn. He promised to see what he could find for Hagrid and for himself, and Hagrid squeezed his hand like a man clutching a lifeline. Back at Gryffindor Tower, Harry Potter hadn't slept. He'd only just gotten back from Hogsmeade the previous day, and he'd arrived there in something close to hope. That hope had been shattered by a single thunderbolt of news. His parents had been betrayed. The traitor had been Sirius Black. The worst sting lay in the other truth that followed like a punch. Sirius Black was his godfather. The word had sounded wrong in Harry's ears, both intimate and incomprehensible. Black had been his father's friend, a trusted comrade, and now he had betrayed them. Betrayal, Harry thought, and the feeling took hold like a live coal in his chest. Hatred boiled up, raw and hot. He could feel his pulse hammering with it. His father's trust turned into treachery. His mother's pleas had been ignored. Fear, grief, fury, they intertwined until he could hardly breathe. Images played in his head like a warped film. He saw Black standing in the dark, laughing. He saw Peter Pettigrew's figure torn apart by that same cruelty. A voice, greedy, triumphant, echoed in his mind. "It worked, Master. The Potters let me be their secret keeper." He could hear his mother's screams, smell the sickly metallic stench of green light. The idea of revenge rose up instantly, a logic too neat to be comforting. Punished, Black deserved punishment. By dawn, Harry wasn't sure whether he'd slept at all. He sat on a sofa in the common room, hollow-eyed and dangerous, the kind of glare that made Ron and Hermione hang back and exchange worried looks. "Harry, you," Hermione began, voice tight. "You look awful." "I know," Harry said, his voice flat. He hadn't meant to sound so far from himself, but anger did that to him. It narrowed everything to a single, bright point. "Where did everyone go?" "They left for the day," Ron said, glancing at him as if deciding what to say. "It's the first day of the holidays. I was about to wake you up for lunch." Outside, the drizzle had turned to fat, lazy snowflakes. Harry stood abruptly, the movement sharp. "Stop," he snapped. "Let's duel, you yellow-bellied." He started, then bit it off. Crookshanks blinked and padded after him when he moved for the door. Hermione reached out, one hand curled round a corner of Harry's sleeve. "Harry, listen," she said. The plea was soft but fierce. She knew him well enough to read the shape of his intentions. He wanted to go find Black. Her face was pale with alarm. "You can't do anything rash." "Like what?" Harry snapped back. He wanted to say, like letting the man who betrayed my parents live, but the words came out raw. "Like going after Black," Ron supplied, hitting the truth bluntly. "You'll get yourself killed." "I might," Harry admitted, the admission dropping out of him like a rock. He knew the consequences. Killing someone would be murder. Murder led to Azkaban. He knew all of that. But letting the man who had killed his parents walk freely felt like letting his wounds be picked at by insects. "Do you know what I see when a Dementor comes near me?" he asked, voice gone hoarse. "I hear Mum screaming. I hear her begging. If you heard your mother like that before she died, you wouldn't be able to forget it either." Hermione's face crumpled. "You can't do anything," she cried, more out of helplessness than logic. "Harry, but you want me to do nothing?" Harry shot back, the question terrible and raw. The room fell quiet. He looked at Hermione, at Ron, and then his eyes softened, the fury bleeding out of them into exhaustion. He swallowed and said quietly, "I'm sorry, Hermione. I just, whenever I think of that person." His voice broke on the last word, the sentence unfinished, heavy with everything he couldn't say. Chapter 103. "Then what do you want to do when you find him?" Ron swallowed hard, nervously fidgeting. His voice trembled. "Do you want to kill Black or something?" Harry said nothing. Hermione, already anxious, jumped in. "Don't be ridiculous. Harry wouldn't want to kill anyone, would you, Harry?" She kept hoping he'd be reasonable, but Harry stayed silent. No argument from her could draw a reply. To break the tension, Ron suggested they go see Hagrid, After all, it was Christmas, and Hagrid would welcome visitors. Hermione shot him a glare that said he'd picked the worst possible idea. It was dangerous out there. What if Sirius Black caught Harry? But Harry agreed immediately. Hermione and Ron couldn't dissuade him. They only followed, worried and helpless. Snow started light and quickly thickened until the ground was a white blanket of powder. Inside Hagrid's hut, John sat staring at the investigation letter he'd received, lost in thought. "Why does Buckbeak's neck feel so precarious?" he muttered, the image pulled straight from the film. At the first words, Hagrid's sorrow erupted into a keening wail that shook the hut. John covered his ears and looked at Hagrid enviously. That man's voice, that strength. Hagrid was the perfect template for a warrior. John tried to reach across and pat Hagrid's shoulder, but ended up patting his enormous belly instead. There was a knock at the door. Hagrid, still unsteady, opened it, and 3 shaggy heads poked in. John's face went white. "Hagrid, be careful," he shouted, afraid Hagrid might squeeze them to pieces in a hug. Hagrid softened his embrace, and the 3 let out shrieks. Then the door was closed. Hagrid collapsed at the table and wept as if his heart were breaking. The teacup on the table nearly bounced off its saucer as he trembled. "John, Hagrid, what is it?" Harry asked, puzzled by the scene. John pointed at the letter. Harry picked it up and read aloud. "We have accepted Professor Dumbledore's assurance that you are not to be held responsible for this regrettable incident." "Isn't that good?" Harry asked, puzzled. John gestured for him to read on. When Harry saw the Ministry's handling, Buckbeak to be dealt with by the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, the confusion deepened. It sounded like just a hearing. Why the crying? Hagrid sobbed. "You don't know those fellows on that committee. They always pick on the interesting animals." From a corner of the hut came the unmistakable sound of chewing. Everyone turned to see Buckbeak, happily gnawing a bloody chunk of meat. The spot of blood on the floor contradicted Hagrid's idea of interesting animals. John only had to look at Hagrid to know what he meant. Anything that wouldn't kill him was interesting. The 3 little ones mirrored Hagrid's expression. Hermione immediately offered to defend Buckbeak at the hearing. Harry, whose mind had been full of revenge, shifted to how to help after seeing Hagrid's grief. Ron and Hermione had expected him to scold Hagrid for keeping Sirius Black's details secret, but Harry couldn't. Hagrid was like a father to him. How could Harry possibly berate him? Hagrid, convinced his defense was useless, kept picturing Buckbeak's head being severed. Sadness and fear clung to him. John tried to pick at a rock cake and found it tasteless. "What did Dumbledore say, Hagrid?" he asked. Hagrid lifted his tear-streaked face. "He's done a lot for me already. He's got his hands full. Dementors, or Sirius, he's swamped." Then the old giant collapsed into more wailing. "My poor Buckbeak." "All right, maybe there's another way," John said, attempting to sound confident. Everyone turned to him. He almost smiled, then remembered a problem. His right hand couldn't be relied on right now. The awkward truth was that Johnny Silverhand, the other identity tied to John, wrote with his right hand. Forgeries, aliases, handwriting quirks, John's left and right-hand styles were deliberately different, so no one would connect Johnny Silverhand with John Wick. He could have pulled in Wick's connections to make the Ministry back down, but that would mean dragging Damo Alex or others into a matter of a hippogriff, and that was beneath his pride. Tang Mi, captain of the Silverhand security team, could handle brute force, but to make the Ministry give face, it would take someone higher up. He sighed. Never mind, there's still time. Buckbeak's hearing wasn't until April 24th, months away. John left Hagrid's hut. Hagrid kept sobbing too loudly for his own good. Outside, 3 small creatures, 1 large and 2 smaller, were half buried in a snowbank, their rumps sticking out. Fang padded over, pulled them out one by one like he was harvesting turnips. John shook the snow from his coat and looked up at the sky. "Guess the animagus work can't be finished in 2 months," he said wryly, and left a line of footprints in the fresh snow. The next day, the trio buried themselves in research in the library, like they had in their first year when searching for Nicholas Flamel. John stayed behind at Hagrid's for a while and collected 2 unicorn horns Hagrid had been keeping in reserve. He had thought about venturing into the Forbidden Forest himself to find a unicorn, but unicorns were notoriously sensitive. Legends said they only allowed the pure of heart to touch them. They sensed malice and recoiled. Wands with unicorn hair were poor choices for those dabbling in dark arts for a reason. John ground the unicorn horn into powder and stirred it into his cauldron. The brew changed from green to a milky white. He took a sip and swallowed without expression. Nearby on the table lay his old flying shoes, shrunken and uncomfortable after he'd grown. He'd been meaning to upgrade them. He had crafted a new pair and named them meteor shoes. Faster, higher, stronger than the originals. The new pair looked too big at first. When he tapped his heels, they tightened and hugged his feet like a second skin. The material felt soft yet unbreakable. Even an ordinary shattering spell wouldn't tear them. He'd etched runes onto them, ehwaz, the rune of transportation, so rough ground would feel as smooth as a road. He snapped his fingers and the room of requirement reshaped itself into a racetrack. John bounced, ready, then stamped down hard. His body shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bow. Speed built quickly. The meteor patterns on the shoes began to glow. By the time the patterns were fully lit, he was practically flying just above the track. On the ground, he'd been reaching supercar levels of velocity. After a lap, he slowed and breathed. "Time to test flight," he murmured. Tiny flapping wings unfolded from the shoe's sides. He leapt, and his whole body lifted. Adjusting his posture, he accelerated in the air. After another lap, he landed, wind tussled, and smoothed his hair. The meteor shoes outpaced most brooms. Only the firebolt might be comparable. He wondered how fast the firebolt truly was. He landed, the little wings folded away, and he snapped his fingers. The racetrack dissolved like melting ice, revealing the Gryffindor common room. Since becoming Gryffindor's heir, he'd learned to manipulate the room of requirement at will. He didn't have Gryffindor's sword, but the room was enough. If any magic at Hogwarts deserved the title of greatest, it was this room, a culmination of the four founders' ingenuity. Christmas Day arrived. Mischievous Tom was nearly buried under a mountain of gifts and pawed his way out. Presents from Slytherin kids, from his maternal uncles, and from his parents lay in heaps. Watson Wick had sent a chirping toy bird, Mrs. Wick an intricate pocket watch. His father's long letter, part vent, part request, basically boiled down to one ask: make him a wand, core or no core. John scowled. His father always liked to ask for things. His maternal family was even more extravagant. His grandfather and grandmother had 12 children, an energetic brood that left John with 9 maternal uncles and 2 aunts. Last time only his eldest uncle had sent a gift. This time all of them had. Fortunately, most of their presents were harmless. Nesting dolls, a few knives and brass knuckles, less risky than guns. The most useful gift came from Uncle Andre, who used to take John hunting. A large box of preserved meat. Cold-packed, it wouldn't spoil, and John was relieved. He'd have one less thing to worry about. Chapter 124. After unwrapping the presents from his uncles, the aunts weren't nearly as lavish. Gloves and a scarf, practical if unexciting. John put them on and kept unwrapping. The little Slytherin wizards had been pragmatic. Most of their gifts were sweets and small trinkets. Malfoy had sent exquisite pastries, the same kind Daphne had brought. Heinrich had sent a book about the dark arts, which John quietly slipped away and hid. Since everyone knew John liked to eat, most of the parcels were food. If it had been last year, John would have been delighted. Now the things brought him no joy. By noon, John noticed the 3 youngest. Harry and Ron were giggling like idiots, while Hermione stood apart, clearly upset. No guessing necessary. They'd had a spat. Because there were so few people, Dumbledore had suggested everyone dine together. At the table, besides Dumbledore and McGonagall and a handful of other professors, Filch sat down too. 1 Slytherin 5th year and 2 first years were present as well. Counting the 3 youngsters, there were exactly 12 people. John didn't dare go over. He was afraid Dumbledore might notice something. Dumbledore, the white mage, knew ancient magic. If Lord Voldemort knew such things, so could Dumbledore. John's soul had been damaged, and discovery now would be terrible. He found a flimsy excuse and stayed away. Dumbledore, seeing John absent, turned to Filch. To everyone's surprise, Filch had for once taken off his usual brown coat and was wearing a brand new tuxedo. Grinning broadly, Filch puffed out his chest and announced, in an oddly boastful yet casual tone, "This is a Christmas present." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. Given Filch's status, someone had actually sent him a gift. From whom? He asked. Filch's grin widened. John Wick, Headmaster Dumbledore. Hearing John's name, Dumbledore smiled and asked where John had gone. The Slytherin fifth year replied, he and Edgar left, said they had things to do. Trelawney made an exception and came out, someone said, and she started in about a curse on 13 people. If you were the first to stand up, you'd die. No one took her seriously. After lunch, Harry couldn't wait to get back to the common room. Then he had received a firebolt, and he and Ron were beside themselves with excitement, ignoring entirely the question of who might have sent it. Hermione worried that an unknown gift could be dangerous. She tried to reason with them, but the two boys were oblivious, their eyes glued to the broom. When Crookshanks pounced on Scabbers again, Ron sneered. Harry thought Ron was being harsh, but with his mind fixed on the firebolt, he said nothing. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Harry and Ron were admiring the broom from every angle when the portrait hole opened. Hermione came in with Professor McGonagall. McGonagall's sharp eyes immediately spotted the firebolt. Miss Granger told me someone sent you a broom, Potter, she said. Harry tried to hide it, but it was too late. The broom had arrived with no note, no sender, its origin a mystery. McGonagall, with a professionalism born of experience, decided to confiscate it temporarily for inspection. Harry's voice trembled as he protested. It's fine, really, Professor. You can't be sure, Potter, McGonagall said, kind but firm. With Sirius out of Azkaban and everything so sensitive, she wouldn't allow an unknown broom to be ridden. I'll let you know if I learn anything. She intended to dismantle and inspect the firebolt herself, or have it inspected properly. Harry watched numbly as she took it away. Ron, furious, turned on Hermione. Why did you tell Professor McGonagall? He snapped. Hermione was hurt and flushed, whether with shame or anger she wasn't sure. Because I thought Professor McGonagall thought the same, that the broom might have been sent by Sirius Black, she said defiantly. She'd meant well, trying to protect them, but she was misunderstood. Even Harry felt a flash of resentment. Hermione, feeling wronged, pushed through the portrait hole and left. Chapter 142, Vehicle Killer and Password. Hermione was clever enough to understand the gravity of the situation. That's why she had gone to McGonagall. Being blamed for doing the sensible thing stung. She decided to go to the library to calm herself, but as she walked, she spotted Crookshanks bounding along, Tom trotting behind him, ears flopping and short legs working hard. The affection between the two little animals made her jealous. She abandoned the path to the library and followed them instead. The pair ran surprisingly fast for such short legs, and Hermione, out of breath, chased them onto the Quidditch pitch. There she found John, frowning at a tightly wrapped gift box. Surprised to see him, he wasn't a Quidditch player. She hurried over and asked, John, what are you doing here? He looked up at her with an idea forming. He waved cheerfully. Perfect timing, Hermione. Help me test something. Hermione stared as John ripped off the wrapping to reveal a brand new firebolt. It was identical to the one Harry had received that morning. The gleaming shaft, the golden registration number, the streamlined birch twig tail. It was artful and aggressive, every line a promise of speed. John held it in one hand. The broom trembled slightly, then hovered at a convenient mounting height. A firebolt? Where did you get it? Hermione demanded, alarmed. She worried, like she did with Harry's gift, that someone might have sent it anonymously. John looked momentarily taken aback by the question. I bought it, he said. If he hadn't bought it, she thought, someone would be giving him one too. John's expression tightened as he looked at the broom. He'd 5,000 galleons on it, a sum that stung. Despite his family's wealth, John had ongoing expenses, keeping up ties, gifts, alchemical research, books, salaries. After all that, his disposable income was only a few thousand galleons a day. That's a day's income for me, he muttered, trying to make light of it. He'd ordered the firebolt before Christmas, planning to play with it, but then he'd injured his hand, so it hadn't been used. Now, he wanted to test the speed of his meteor shoes against a proper broom. In the wizarding world, brooms were like sports cars. Even owning one was part of the prestige. He'd thought of giving it to a Quidditch player later to win favor. If he gave it to Wood, John joked to himself, Wood would worship him for a month. But there was a problem. His right hand was still injured and couldn't properly control the broom. He didn't want to risk falling. He held the firebolt out to Hermione with an apologetic look. "Help me fly a lap to check its speed. My hand's injured." Hermione's eyes widened. John could really afford a firebolt. She hadn't known the price, but she knew it wasn't cheap. She worried he might have misjudged the risk. The firebolt was the fastest production broom on the market, and it wasn't for timid riders. "Can't we find Heinrich? Or Harry? I haven't seen him use a broom either." John frowned, thinking. He could go fetch Harry or drag Malfoy back. "I can fly a lap," Hermione volunteered, suddenly determined. "Which hand is injured?" John raised his right hand. It trembled slightly, looking worse than he described. "Something went wrong during some research," he said wryly. "It won't heal for a while, but 2 months at most." Hermione relaxed a little on hearing that. She mounted the firebolt awkwardly. She wasn't a star flyer like Harry, and without John watching, she might have backed out. For a brief moment, she imagined Harry and Ron's faces if they saw her riding a firebolt. They'd be green with envy. Holding her breath, she pushed off. The firebolt shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bow. Hermione screamed as everything blurred. A doorway sprang up in front of her, and Hermione screamed, pulling hard as the firebolt shot upward. John saw she couldn't control it. He sprinted a few steps, feeling the wind under his feet, then leapt. Wings unfurled from the sides of his shoes. Hermione flew ahead on the firebolt. John chased after her. He did the math as he ran, 150 miles in 10 seconds of acceleration. It really was the fastest broom in the world. The wings on his shoes widened and beat faster. The meteor shoes surged, and John closed the gap. A hoop appeared directly in front of Hermione. Without hesitation, he cast the shattering spell. The hoop disintegrated into dust, but the fragments didn't fall. They exploded outward and splattered across Hermione's face. Fortunately, only shards remained. Had the hoop been whole when she struck it at that speed, she would have been cremated. "Accelerate," John ordered. He switched modes. The runes on his shoes lit up and his speed spiked. A contrail streaked behind him as he overtook Hermione. He reached out and grabbed the back of her robe. "Let go," he muttered. Hermione clung to the firebolt like a sloth, and John frowned. He had to pull harder. "Hermione, let go." She finally saw him. Trust made her release the broom without question. The firebolt slipped free. John had her by the collar like a small cat. The broom wobbled, then began to fall. John channeled magic through his right hand until it trembled. He was forcing the object summoning spell. The falling firebolt was hauled back and set down gently. He and Hermione descended together. The wings on the meteor shoes beat more and more slowly, seeming exhausted. Hermione's legs were weak when they touched ground. She steadied herself and said, "Guilty. I'm sorry, John. I thought. It's good you're okay." John wiped cold sweat from his brow. He'd never let Hermione on a firebolt again. Those brooms were practically death traps for inexperienced riders. Still, he'd learned something. In acceleration mode, the meteor shoes could keep pace with a firebolt. There was an even more powerful mode, super acceleration, but it chewed through a fifth of a magic crystal in a single use. The crystals he'd installed only allowed 5 such blasts. That was a cost he wasn't eager to pay. Hermione's spirits, which had been low, brightened noticeably after the rescue. She burst into a relieved cry, and John awkwardly pinched his ear, unsure why she was so excited. "Firebolt," she shouted, and ran toward where it had landed. Harry and Ron were already furious from Professor McGonagall having taken the firebolt for inspection. If their prized broom had been damaged, there would have been an outcry. Hermione reached it and found it pristine, no scratches, as good as new. Calm returned to her face, but questions formed in her mind. How had John flown beside her, and how had the broom come through unscathed? She glanced at him and saw Crookshanks dangling from John's hand, held gently by the hind legs to keep him from running off. Seeing that, Hermione stilled. John had always been mysterious. Maybe she shouldn't pry. She remembered that Ron disliked Crookshanks and that she'd been tied up with Buckbeak's case lately. She stepped closer and asked, "John, could you help look after Crookshanks?" Of course he could. John lifted the cat as easily as he had lifted Hermione and began to scratch Crookshanks' belly, chuckling. Of course. Hermione's face lit up. Crookshanks didn't like leaving the Gryffindor common room, so she added, "I'll write down the Gryffindor password for you." John smiled. Free cat time. It would be his to pet during the day. He'd just have to bring Crookshanks back to sleep in the common room at night. When they returned, Ron was still scowling, but Harry had calmed down. He followed Hermione and blurted, "Hermione, what happened to your hair?" After being blown around during the makeshift Quidditch loop, her hair was a wild, bushy mess, swept back into something that looked like an afro. She rushed to the dormitory mirror, remembered John trying to hold back a laugh, and ground her teeth like an angry lioness. Chapter 143, Frightened Dementors and the Limited Gauntlet. Ever since the Aurors had taken control of the Dementors, the creatures had lived in constant fear. The Auror in charge, Oz Healed, listened to their wailing and felt a vain throb in her temple. "What are these abominations screaming about?" she rasped. Rippy Cabayer, another Auror on the team, wore the same tense expression. They both wanted to drive the Dementors straight back to Azkaban. Oz inhaled to steady herself. She was a veteran, 10 years on the force, experienced enough to lead a team, but that one mistake had cost her. "These Dementors haven't fed in a long time," she said finally, "and Sirius Black is nearby. We can't send them back to Azkaban right now." At the name Sirius, Rippy's mouth tightened. The Ministry's wanted poster called him extremely dangerous. Even an Auror might be outmatched. For more than half a year, an extremely dangerous man had been hiding in Hogwarts. Both men thought unkindly of the Ministry and of Cornelius Fudge. Rippy looked at Oz. "Don't you have any ideas?" "Ideas?" Oz echoed, glancing at him. Rippy snorted, pulled a cigarette from his pocket and flicked it toward Oz, then lit one for himself. They were heavy smokers. Smoke curled from their lips as he said, "The Ministry is in a power transition. Isn't this a chance to climb the ladder?" As Oz's old partner, Rippy knew her well. She was talented, senior among Aurors in both rank and skill, but the werewolf incident had left a permanent blemish on her record. With the Ministry's prior suppression of the Auror office, she'd stagnated. No promotion to elite Auror, no more prestige. She led teams on outside searches and confiscations instead. Rippy said ruefully, "If Tying Me were still here, you'd be right up there with him." He stopped when he saw Oz's murderous look and hastily raised his hands. "All right, I won't say any more." They talked quietly outside while the Dementors continued to moan. The creatures huddled together and retreated like a tide at the edge of the lake. One person moved among them, selecting as if choosing livestock. A Dementor that lagged behind was singled out. Black silk threads shot out and wrapped around it, and it screamed as it was dragged away. The others fell silent with terror and scattered. The Aurors didn't notice. Who would expect someone to actively hunt Dementors? From where he stood, John watched as the others fled. He had just taken one himself and rolled his eyes at how cowardly the rest were. "They're supposed to be Azkaban's guards?" he tutted. He promised to return the next day, and the remaining Dementors trembled so badly their tattered cloaks nearly blew away. John brought the captured Dementor back to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. He used the soul-eating curse to strip it clean. The black threads recoiled into the ring on his hand, and a ball of soul, shining with a sacred silvery white light, rested in his palm. He tore the soul into strips and tossed them into a cauldron to brew with his potions. He added unicorn horn, and the concoction turned into a strengthening draught for the soul. He drank it down in one gulp. His body shuddered. A man he had seen before flickered into his mind, persistent and painful as always. John slumped forward, drenched in sweat, bracing himself on the workbench. "My soul's recovered a bit," he breathed. He closed his eyes and felt the change. The soul in his right hand had mended slightly. Each time he subjected himself to this torment, it felt as if his soul were being tempered. He opened his right hand and watched dark, malevolent threads writhe beneath the skin. His eyes darkened. So far he had used the ring's power only on Dementors. What would happen if he used it on another living being? The thought chilled him. John pushed the notion away and looked at the ring. Its surface had grown darker. He knew the thing was beginning to influence him. "Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown," he murmured to himself. He forced his gaze back into clarity and moved to another room in the chamber. A wave of heat hit him before he even opened the door. A chunk of mithril was slowly melting in a furnace. The process was painfully slow. "At this rate, it'll take some time," he said. Across the room, he set to work on a mold. This one wasn't for a sword. It was shaped like a hand. With a small knife, he carefully refined every line and curve. If he was Johnny Silverhand, he thought, then he deserved a silver hand to match. Chapter 126. With the details finished, all that remained was to pour in the melted mithril. The hand had 6 slots reserved for gems, almost like a certain purple fellow's infinity gauntlet. While waiting for the mithril to liquefy, John finished the last touches on the silver hand. He called it the limited gauntlet. It wasn't a simple trinket. Arguably, it was the strongest alchemical item he could make for now. When the mithril melted, John poured it into the mold and reached out to weave magic into the metal. The liquid solidified and cooled. He broke the mold open and revealed an exquisitely crafted silver arm. He set the magic crystals and the gems from the Ring of Charms into the 6 recesses. John grabbed the silver hand with his right hand, and the silver hand shattered. The fragments clung to his arm, fusing until his right hand had become silver. Intricate patterns ran along the arm, the gems lending it an air of nobility. He moved his fingers with no restriction. He clenched and unclenched his fist, glanced at the furnace, and without hesitation thrust his hand into the roaring flames. The fire that would have melted steel did nothing to him. Instead of pain, he felt a cool, pleasant sensation. "The flesh is weak, the machine shall ascend," he murmured. He pulled his hand free, snapped his fingers, and the objects around him floated, their only basic levitation and shield charms, but useful. A white orb of light appeared in his palm. He aimed it at a table, and the orb shattered the wood. John nodded, satisfied. He lowered his hand, and the silver flowed like liquid toward his middle finger, finally condensing into a silver ring. One ring silver, one black, the 2 on his right hand stood out. He slipped the silver ring off and pocketed it, already imagining that once he made the Philosopher's Stone, this could become a true, magical infinity gauntlet. Leaving the Chamber of Secrets, John passed the Constellation Society's room. Heinrich looked up and asked, "Finished?" "Yes." John wasn't in his wizard robe, but a waistcoat suit with his sleeves rolled to his elbows. Heinrich glanced at the firebolt inside the Chamber of Secrets. John grinned. "You like it? I'll give it to you." Heinrich lowered his gaze. "I don't need it." With Edgar's wealth, a firebolt was trivial. John felt a faint headache, shrugged into his robe, and said, "Come with me." Heinrich followed without a question. John opened the door to the room of requirement and led him in. A dueling platform had appeared. Heinrich's golden eyes brightened. John stepped onto the platform and bowed politely. "You don't need a firebolt, so I'll train you to get stronger." Heinrich's expression shifted to fervor. Battle was what pleased him, and John was more than ready to provide it. On the last day of Christmas, Heinrich fought like a frenzy. He had a great talent for fire magic. His wand sent out swarms of fire bats toward John. John pressed his lips together, raised his hand, and turned nearby stone blocks into 2 large dogs to intercept the attack. Seizing the moment, he pointed his wand at Heinrich's feet. The ground collapsed, and Heinrich grabbed the edge, splinters cutting his palm until blood trickled down. As he hauled himself up, John condensed a heavy ball of water and slammed it onto Heinrich. The water prison charm closed around him, filling his nose and mouth with water. John let the charm go a second before Heinrich fainted. He collapsed to the floor, soaking wet. John hauled him up and said, "You've improved a lot." That wasn't just courtesy. Compared to his time at Durmstrang, Heinrich had gained real skill. Facing John had raised his reaction speed and charms level. The fervor in his eyes was almost devotional. His pale face and fixed smile gave off a distinctly possessive, yandere-like vibe. The day's training ended, and they parted ways. John went to the Gryffindor common room. He said the password and walked in. The usually quiet room was fuller than usual, everyone sharing holiday stories. When John entered, the chatter died. Crookshanks, however, was waiting by the fireplace and ran over. John scooped up the cat, stroked his fur, smiled, and said, "Carry on." Then he left. Crookshanks dropped down and walked away without a backward glance. He really shows no gratitude, John thought, ruining the wasted cat treats. Basil flew in with a package. Inside was a book bound in dragonhide. "Tang Mi still gets things done," John muttered, pleased. The book, Ancient Goblin Magic Records, was thousands of years old, a record of goblin magic. A faint emerald glow on the cover was visible only to John, an ancient magic sigil. He reached out and touched it. A goblin memory streamed into his mind, and he paused, digesting 3 seconds of alien thought. Money charm? He said quietly. In the memory, a goblin took a galleon. As the coin vanished, a shattered vase repaired itself. This wasn't elemental magic so much as rule-based magic, a transaction. John gradually understood the principle. The coins couldn't be freshly minted or fakes, they had to be circulating currency. After an afternoon of practice, he succeeded once. Holding a galleon, he aimed at a broken cup and used the money charm. The coin vanished, and the cup repaired itself. John blinked at the now whole cup. He had bought it for 10 nuts in Diagon Alley and just spent a whole galleon to fix it. He felt fleeced. Goblins were devious. Their magic hid traps. He remembered the Quidditch goal he'd shattered with a level 4 shattering spell and carried a bag of galleons out to the pitch before anyone noticed. One of the 3 goalposts on the right side had been reduced to a single pole. John cast the money charm while holding a handful of coins. The galleons in his hand disappeared, and the destroyed post began to knit itself together. Splinters and dust rose and reassembled. 5 galleons brought the post halfway. 10 more restored it completely. Total cost, 15 galleons. The repair quality exceeded a repair charm's. If the money charm could restore things ordinary magic couldn't, perhaps curses could be treated this way too. He still needed more experiments, but already it was clear this charm was a money sink. Without a large fortune, it would be impossible. He tried substituting magically created gold and trinkets, but they wouldn't work. First, you must imbue value, then you can create value, he mused. He read on. Besides the money charm, the book recorded a lightning strike spell, powerful and admittedly very dramatic. He closed the book and headed back to his dormitory, his coin pouch empty and his mood dark. He had hoped to use the money charm to repair his right hand, but the coins were gone, and the silver arm showed no sign of repair. Can the soul not be repaired? He asked, glaring at the empty bag and cursing the goblins for their tricks. Chapter 127, the new term had started. In the Great Hall, small groups of students chatted as they ate. John noticed Daphne staring at him across the table. A little puzzled, he touched his face to make sure nothing was stuck there. John, are you in trouble? Daphne asked hesitantly. John blinked. What trouble could she mean? She watched him closely, then added, You don't even look happy when you're eating. Daphne had a keen eye. She could tell John wasn't enjoying his food like he used to. She worried something big had happened over the break. John realized it was simpler than that. The food tasted like chewing wax lately, and he really couldn't enjoy it. It's nothing, he said. I've just not had much of an appetite recently. Hearing those words hit Daphne like a shock. She tore her gaze from the food and decided then and there to make him something delicious to lift his spirits. If John had been able to read her mind, he might have told her, Girl, your thoughts are dangerous. Please stop your Hufflepuff tendencies. The first class after breakfast was divination. John had been practicing his precognitive control and was beginning to manage the crystal ball with some skill. He put both hands on it and peered into the mist inside. Professor Trelawney was lecturing the class, but clearly expected nothing but good things from John. She had already awarded him full marks in her manner. He paid attention to his other lessons too, answering questions when he could. From the high parts of the castle, they could sometimes see aurors bringing dementors to search the grounds. Sirius Black, however, seemed to have vanished from sight. He wasn't to be found in Hogsmeade or around Hogwarts. There had been no second attack, and rumors floated that Sirius might have fallen into water while fleeing. Young wizards loved wild ideas, John thought, and shrugged them off. Hagrid had brought a pile of fire salamanders to class, so it wasn't so bitterly cold. John picked one up and stared into its eyes. For a moment, they seemed to resemble his own, but after a closer look, he couldn't find any real likeness, so he set the salamander down. That evening, John went out to catch a dementor for his meal. Peeling back the layers of whatever charm he used, he saw the curse had nearly blackened the entire ring he wore. He drank the potion that repaired the soul. The familiar, searing pain returned, anchoring him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, an old, weary sight. He took out the Marauder's map. It had grown normal to him to see several Hermione dots running about at once. He noticed Peter Pettigrew tossing and turning on Ron's bed, and Dumbledore pacing in his office. Lupin was mostly in his own office, seemingly busy with something. Harry, meanwhile, was in an entirely different mood. Lupin had promised to teach him the Patronus charm on Thursday, and he was too excited to sleep. Slipping on his invisibility cloak, he crept out of the Gryffindor common room for a walk. After Sirius had broken in once, fewer students wandered the halls at night, but Harry wasn't worried. He had the cloak. As he passed the old room where Fluffy had been kept, he thought he saw a figure glide by, John. The outline was blurred and silent. John moved like a ghost. If Harry hadn't been a seeker, he might have missed him altogether. John slipped into a nearby room and shut the door behind him. Curious, Harry crept closer and eased the door open. The room was dark. For a second, Harry felt like it was his first year again, waiting for Fluffy to lunge out. He pushed the door a little wider and saw nothing. It was empty. He had just seen John enter, so where had he gone? Lumos, Harry whispered, casting light from his wand and searching. There was no sign of John and no other exit. He could only shake his head. John had always been enigmatic, neither simple like Ron nor openly antagonistic like Malfoy. Not long after Harry left, John emerged from the Constellation Society chamber, rubbing his hands. "A few more Dementors should do it," he muttered. His right hand no longer trembled, though he still felt drained. He paused at the door and leaned in close. A small hidden eye symbol carved into the wood, one of John's reconnaissance runes, had stopped spinning. He touched it. The eye settled back into place. The next morning, Daphne brought John a plate with a heap of something that was supposed to be waffles. A fleck of white flour decorated the tip of her nose as she met his gaze, fingers twisting nervously. I wanted to make waffles," she said. John looked at the burnt, misshapen lumps on the plate and tried to be kind. "I shouldn't hold it against you, right?" Daphne's face fell. It was her first attempt, and she hadn't expected them to turn out so poorly. She moved to take the plate away, but John reached out and caught her wrist. Daphne's cheeks flushed a deep pink. She looked suddenly shy and very young. "They're all ruined. Don't eat them," she blurted, then felt a sweet warmth at the thought that a true friend would say anything she made tasted good. She turned to see John splattered with maple syrup. She had tried to pour syrup over the waffles, but accidentally tipped the flask onto his face. "I was just trying to warn you, the maple syrup would spill. Why did you twist your arm?" John wiped at his face. "You twisted your hand and dumped it on me." "Ah, I'm sorry, John." Daphne rushed forward with a handkerchief, but the cooled syrup smeared rather than wiped away. Heinrich, one of their classmates, had to bite his lip to keep from laughing. John held up his hand. "No, stay still. I'll do it." He produced his wand and cast a cleaning charm. The syrup vanished, but the stickiness remained, so he went to the washroom for a proper shower. Daphne buried her face in Pansy's arms, mortified. "I'm ruined," she moaned. Pansy patted her back. "It's okay. See? John isn't angry." Daphne brightened. "Then I'll try harder next time." Pansy muttered under her breath. "If John knew I encouraged her, would he kill me?" From then on, John endured Daphne's ongoing culinary experiments, each attempt more adventurous than the last. He was half convinced Tom had stepped on her homework with dirty shoes at some point and cursed her cooking forever. While he watched the Marauder's map, he noticed Lupin wandering around the staff offices as if searching for something. John didn't know what Lupin was doing, but it didn't stop him from going out that night to catch Dementors. He used a disillusionment charm to leave the castle openly and headed to the usual Dementor gathering place. The number of Dementors had noticeably decreased. Aurors were investigating, but found no escapes. The Ministry began to suspect Sirius Black had been stirring trouble, perhaps trying to take revenge on the Dementors for what they'd done in Azkaban. John moved through the fog and found a Dementor he could catch. He bound it and turned to leave when a shout rang out. "Who's there?" Startled, John immediately triggered his disillusionment charm and activated the meteor shoes he concealed, vanishing from sight and streaking away. Behind him, Oz and Rippy came running, staring in the direction he'd been moving. Oz's face darkened. "It's Sirius Black," he said. Rippy's mouth fell open. "Sirius Black?" Chapter 128. Oz nodded gravely. "I saw that black hair. It couldn't have been anyone but Sirius Black." Rippy's eyes widened. It was a major lead. They immediately contacted other Aurors and mounted a search. The Ministry suspected Sirius Black had mastered some terrifying dark arts tactic. Dementors were being captured, even killed, without a trace. They treated the matter with the utmost seriousness and launched an all-night manhunt. Meanwhile, the person they were after had already slipped back to Hogwarts. Thursday evening. Harry arrived at the History of Magic classroom with a heavy heart. The Daily Prophet that morning had reported that Sirius Black had appeared in public and had captured the Dementors that had tormented Harry, leaving none alive. Harry's temper flared. He swore he would bring that terrifying man to justice. Clenching his fists, he looked up at Professor Lupin and said, "Professor, I want to learn the Patronus charm." Professor Lupin smiled, relief softening his face. It had been worth the effort to find a boggart. The Patronus charm was advanced. Few wizards, even graduates, could truly master it. Lupin himself was among the best. Because of his sensitive nature, he'd learned to make his Patronus practically invisible, achieving complete control. He demonstrated for Harry. A silvery white light streamed from his wand tip, and Harry stared in astonishment. "John Wick is a master of the Patronus charm. I intended for you to learn from him originally, but..." Lupin's words trailed off. Harry caught the hesitation. He wanted to ask what the "but" meant, but Lupin didn't volunteer it. He alone had misgivings about John. As someone older and cautious, Lupin didn't want Harry to be too close to him. A werewolf's instincts told Lupin that John might be dangerous. Ignoring Harry's curious look, Lupin opened the crate he had brought. The boggart, sensing Harry's deepest fear, became a Dementor and flew out. Harry tried to force the words "expecto patronum," but he couldn't. His mother's voice rose in his mind, and the world tipped. He fainted. Lupin shut the boggart away and watched over him. Chapter 146. Professor Lupin's Test and Level 5 Runes. Lately, John had noticed something odd about his animals. It wasn't just Tom. Crookshanks was behaving strangely, too. Watching Tom waddle out of the common room, John stared at an empty bag of dog food. "Eating enough for 3 dogs and you still don't gain weight. Aren't you taking advantage of an honest man?" John had been bringing 3 times the normal amount of food to keep Tom feeling like the pack leader over Fang. But what should have lasted the term was nearly gone already. With an appetite like that, even John should have noticed sooner. To find out where the food went, John cast a disillusionment charm on himself and followed Tom. The dog didn't notice him. Tom met Crookshanks, who had snuck out, and the pair left together. The cat and dog moved in perfect, if unlikely, harmony. Crookshanks clearly the brains, Tom the flatterer. They headed for the humping willow. John watched in disbelief as Crookshanks pressed his paw against the willow's scar. "Is the cat trying to go ghost?" John muttered. When the tree stayed still, Tom bolted inside. Even stranger, Crookshanks sat outside, as if on guard. John moved forward, but the cat blocked the secret entrance. After a while, Tom reappeared. The food on his breath had vanished. John's eyes narrowed. Were these two raising something in the Shrieking Shack? How did they even know about that secret passage? Crookshanks was clever. Before leaving, he even circled back once, apparently to make sure he wasn't being followed. Like owner, like pet, John thought. Using a super sense spell, he confirmed Crookshanks hadn't returned, then slipped through the hidden passage under the humping willow. He hadn't been in the Shrieking Shack for some time. After testing Malfoy there, he'd gradually avoided the place. Its atmosphere was still unsettling as he pushed deeper inside. Something small on the floor caught his eye, a single piece of dog food. He knelt to inspect it, wand already in hand. "Revelio," he whispered, sweeping the wand across the furniture. Nothing obvious revealed itself. Strange. He searched the rest of the room, but found nothing else. Frustrated, he turned to leave. Outside the shack, under the great tree, a head slithered up from a dog-sized hole. What a clever little wizard. If my nose hadn't been sharp, I might have been caught, Sirius Black said to himself, his face briefly holding the human look of lingering fear that came from his animagus form. Transforming into a dog gave him advantages, an extraordinary sense of smell chief among them. A disillusionment charm might hide a body, but it could never mask scent. Sirius relied on that to elude Aurors. The Shrieking Shack was too risky to stay in now. He needed a new hiding place. The last time he'd come to Hogwarts and gone to the Quidditch pitch to see Harry, it had sparked a Dementor chase. He couldn't risk approaching Harry carelessly again. He had friends willing to help. He just needed the right chance. Anger and hatred crossed the large dog's features as Sirius dug the hole deeper and deeper. Back in the corridors, John ran into Professor Lupin. John nodded. Lupin returned the greeting. John turned to go, then heard a whooshing sound by his ear. He spun around just as Lupin's wand swept in front of his face and stopped inches from his forehead. "Is Professor Lupin trying to murder a student at Hogwarts?" John teased softly, deadpan calm. Only 2 people were in the corridor, and Lupin's expression was searching. "Why didn't you dodge?" Lupin asked. John's composure was unnerving, far beyond a typical third year. Even many Aurors would flinch with a wand aimed at them. John smiled faintly. "Because I'm not afraid." Lupin blinked. "Oh?" John shrugged. No one would be foolish enough to try to commit murder inside the castle. His answer was confident and logical. Lupin lowered his wand, apologetic. "Forgive me. I mistook you for Sirius Black. Black was inside the castle not long ago." "I understand. I was just outside for a bit," John said calmly. Then, almost casually, he added, "As long as it's not murder, I don't mind." Lupin looked at him, puzzled. "Murder?" John shifted subjects and said, "I heard you were at Hogwarts too, Professor. You must know a lot about the school." Lupin nodded, modest. "I know some things." "Do you know of any murders at Hogwarts?" John asked, locking his gaze with Lupin's. Lupin's pupils tightened. A memory flashed, an ugly moment from his past that might have gone much worse if James Potter hadn't been there. He collected himself and kept his tone light. "Why are you asking about such things?" Catching that flicker of reaction, John smiled. "I'm compiling a collection of Hogwarts stories. Nothing captures attention like tales of murder." His explanation was airtight. Lupin sensed John might know more than he admitted. The 2 men exchanged a look, each tasting the other's hidden depths. As they parted, the same thought crossed both their minds. This one is trouble. Lupin's questions had been a test. He still couldn't place John's ties to Johnny Silverhand or anyone else, but he suspected John wasn't as straightforward as he seemed. John, for his part, confirmed one unsettling thing. There had been a murder at Hogwarts, and Lupin was somehow connected to it. Whether that murder had been completed or only attempted remained unclear. Their little probing had left them both wary, neither gaining the upper hand. Later, John headed to the Constellation Society chamber. His runes had just leveled up, level 5 runes, without him having to spend a free point. With 2 level 5 skills under his belt, he felt his understanding of magic deepen. He took the silver vein sword from where it had lain unused and strengthened its enchantment. Wounds caused by the silver vein sword will be hard to heal. Chapter 129, The 4 Houses' Styles and the Stench of Love. John finished binding the silver vein sword with a cutting charm that ordinary magic couldn't undo. He carved runes into the hilt and linked them to the blade. "When I'm in danger, this sword will come to protect me," he murmured. He tried to hold it in his right hand, but the defect there made it impossible. He could only manage it with his left. He slid the sword back into his small bag and went on to brew the potion for soul restoration. 1 Dementor soul lasted for 3 doses. After drinking this whole pot, he'd need more, and last time he'd caught Dementors, he'd drawn the Auror's attention. Going out openly again would be difficult. John thought it through. If he couldn't catch them outside Hogwarts, he could at least do it in Hogsmeade. With the Ministry on high alert over Sirius Black, Hogsmeade was being watched, but that only meant he'd have to be more careful. He slipped out through the hunchbacked witch's secret passage, arrived at Honeyduke's, and used a disillusionment charm to leave. At night, the village was empty, Dementors drifting like hollow shadows. There were Aurors on patrol, but John kept his head down and picked out a lone Dementor to target. The roar of the crowd was replaced by the chill of early February back at Hogwarts. Quidditch was in full swing, Slytherin versus Ravenclaw, and John watched the green and blue bodies weaving through the sky. Quidditch had no time limit. Until the snitch was caught, the game went on. He thought about the stories of matches that had lasted for months. This one felt like that kind of intensity, long, fierce, and personal. Ravenclaw's seeker was Cho Chang, a fourth year whose flying technique was delicate and clever. She couldn't quite catch up with Malfoy, whose style was aggressive and foul-prone, but her aerial control kept her in the hunt. John found himself looking at Cho with a strange mix of familiarity and distance. She was from the Celestial Empire, and when she was still, she held the quiet grace of an Eastern lady. On a broom, she became a soaring little eagle. Cedric Diggory was practically glued to Cho's side. John had assumed Cedric was cheering for the Constellation Society, but he was clearly smitten with Cho. Watching Cedric watch her made John sure that if Malfoy kept up his rough tactics, the Slytherin Seeker would receive a very special kind of greeting after the match. The four houses each had their own Quidditch styles. Gryffindor played direct and adaptable. Hufflepuff relied on endurance and steady technique. Ravenclaw favored precise tactics. Slytherin, by contrast, played dirty and paid to win. Their repertoire included underhanded moves. Flint's Star Shift could flat out knock someone off a broom, and Malfoy favored brutal charges that looked more like a beater's game than a seeker's. Ravenclaw's careful plans couldn't hold up against constant fouls, and in the end, Slytherin scraped through with a narrow victory. Malfoy swaggered over after the win. Cedric, ignoring him completely, hurried to comfort Cho. John heard repeated Draco Malfoy muttered in angry, wounded tones, and plenty of dirty and despicable. Malfoy's face darkened. John stepped forward and patted Malfoy's shoulder, teasing, "Your playing's pretty dirty. Does your father know?" Malfoy blinked, baffled. "Dirty? Isn't that what Slytherins do?" His father had joked before about putting a Gryffindor in the hospital wing. Malfoy looked ready to argue, but the moment had passed. February moved on. John wrote to Nagini. After so long as a snake, she needed time to recuperate. Her left hand and right leg were badly eroded and would take over a year to heal. When John found her, she had almost been consumed. She was grateful to be human again, but she wasn't a muggle or a witch. She'd relied on the blood curse to transform into a python and had never studied magic properly. Security work wasn't a good fit, but John had another idea. Johnny Silverhand needed a secretary. He'd taken over the Shafiq family's business in Nocturne Alley, opened a bookstore in Diagon Alley, and his operations had grown too large to run alone. He regretted that Jin Ledisley had been only a part-timer and left before term started. John had wanted to cultivate him. The security team had also expanded to 20 people, with Tong Mi still captain and 2 squad leaders to help manage things. John planned a Nocturne Alley strike team to handle unruly dark wizards, though that project hadn't launched yet. Fudge's earlier crackdown on the Johnny Silverhand store had left ministry officials wary, and starting such a team would make them even more nervous. Rufus Scrimgeour had taken the minister's office, and though he was respectful toward John, he no longer seemed awestruck. John read Scrimgeour's name a lot in the Daily Prophet. He was consolidating power and trying to win public support. Until Scrimgeour dealt with Sirius Black, he wouldn't feel secure in the job, so he naturally avoided showing disrespect to Johnny Silverhand. John kept wondering where Sirius Black would hide if Harry were his target. He figured Sirius might be inside Hogwarts. After all, he used to attend the school and would know secret passages the Marauder's map didn't show. The map wasn't omnipotent. Places like the Room of Requirement or the Chamber of Secrets were outside its reach. John's own Constellation Society chamber was protected so that the map couldn't detect it either. He'd even left protective magic in the Shrieking Shack. If anyone entered, he'd be notified. Dementor catching became harder as the Ministry realized someone was targeting them. Aurors started leading patrols. For the first time, John returned to Hogwarts empty-handed. Valentine's Day drew near, and the castle itself smelled of romance. Daphne seemed to find any excuse to lean toward John, her cheeks flushed. She wasn't the sugary sort, more the poised, aristocratic type, with a pointed chin and striking eyes. She was beautiful already. John could picture how many hearts she would break when she was fully mature. "John," she said softly, trying to sound casual, though her ears went red. "Valentine's Day is coming. I wonder how many people will confess to you this year." John's face darkened at the mention of the holiday. Last year's events, Lockhart's embarrassing theatrics, left him wary. Daphne noticed his puzzled expression and choked on her next sentence. She stamped on his foot in annoyance and stormed off. John rubbed the sore spot and felt an odd relief at being spared whatever chocolates she might have made. Daphne's cooking, he thought, was an experience. Color, aroma, and taste, none of them quite there. Sometimes her food was half-cooked, sometimes raw flavors crawled across the tongue. Daphne's a good girl, he sighed as she left, as long as she doesn't cook. Across the courtyard, Cedric and Cho laughed together, their new closeness obvious. On the other side, Malfoy continued to needle Harry, making faces and taunting Ron for his appetite. The castle thrummed with small dramas, Quidditch victories, blooming crushes, and the quieter, colder business of hunting dementors and watching for a dangerous fugitive. John felt the threads pulling in different directions and knew there was little time to relax. Chapter 130. John watched everything without expression. That kid is definitely secretly in love, he remarked to himself. Whether Harry owed the other boy money or had been emotionally duped wasn't clear, but anyone who flirted so recklessly with danger every day had a kind of dedication. Harry retrieved his firebolt and, uninterested in arguing with Malfoy, rode it to a spectacular debut the next day. He won decisively against Ravenclaw and was soon surrounded by cheering classmates. Cedric hurried over to comfort Cho Chang while the crowd roared. Later, the tensions between houses flared up again. John didn't understand why the same arguments kept exploding. Ron and Hermione were bickering once more. Ron had discovered a bloodstain on his bed and accused Crookshanks of eating Scabbers, yelling at Hermione until she stormed out. John, seeing ginger fur in the room, privately suspected Crookshanks too. That fur didn't lie. "So, you ran here?" John heard someone say. At the Slytherin table, Hermione sat on his right, eyes full of hurt. Daphne glared at him from his left, her plate of bacon showing the telltale marks of nervous poking. Malfoy, who never liked Hermione, pretended not to notice and lowered his head to drink pumpkin juice as if it were the world's most delicious thing. Goyle and Crabbe kept their heads down and chewed in awkward silence. The mood was thick enough to cut. John sighed. "I'll help you sort it out. Don't be sad, Hermione." There was a crack, distant but audible. Daphne had snapped the brittle edge of her plate in half. Malfoy buried his face lower in his cup. Goyle choked on his bread. Crabbe kept eating, oblivious. Seeing the broken plate, John thought with a wry twist that it would be a shame not to put it to use as a sword. Daphne rose without expression. "I'm full," she said and left, clearly angry. The Slytherin-Gryffindor resentment loomed like a mountain between them. John added, "Scabbers isn't dead, I don't think." He took a sip of water. That rat would be hard to kill. The real question was where Scabbers had gone. John made a mental note to check the Marauders map later. Hermione looked up at that, and for the first time in hours, there was a glimmer of hope in her reddened eyes. "Some things aren't as simple as they seem. That rat's different," John said vaguely. Only he knew what that meant. When class time came, Hermione was gone in an instant. John finished his meal and looked up to find Malfoy at last daring to meet his gaze. Malfoy hesitated, then leaned in. "John, I heard Heinrich say you have a firebolt," he blurted, then hurried on. "Not for me, for Flint. That Potter's got a firebolt, and he said I might not be able to catch him." Malfoy was annoyed at being outdone by equipment. John raised an eyebrow. "So you want me to give it to you?" "No, just lend it." Malfoy only wanted it for the final match. John smiled and stood. "Come to the Constellation Society this afternoon. You know where it is. That thing is kept there." Malfoy's face brightened. John wasn't doing it for free, though. He leaned in and murmured, "Tell Flint to show more respect to whoever's riding the firebolt from now on." Since it would be treated like a collectible, John didn't mind lending it. Hopefully Flint would learn a bit of humility. Later, in divination, John stared into the crystal ball. The mist within parted like hands drawing curtains, and images came through with a chill clarity. Hermione talking to him, her face anxious. Professor Snape unconscious, set against a wall as if he'd struck it. The overwhelming presence of Dementors, far worse than the ones at the Quidditch pitch. Then the vision snapped off. John withdrew his gaze. Sybil Trelawney was suddenly before him, glowing with excitement. "John, what did you see?" The students around them went quiet, half fearful that John might utter another doom speech. He thought for a moment and said, "I saw someone unconscious, blood running along their hair." "Ah! Don't say it! Don't say it!" Lavender shrieked, terrified. The room filled with tension. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, wondering whether to believe him. Ron shrugged. "John's probably just trying to scare us. He guessed one right by accident." But John still looked into the crystal ball and added, "A black dog, a black-haired man." He let the words hang, then forced his expression to normal. "That's all for now." Trelawney seized his hand, abandoning her usual eccentric restraint. "You're the most gifted person I've ever seen. You will become a seer." She promptly awarded him 50 house points, making John feel a little embarrassed, as if he'd cheated. After class, Harry approached cautiously. "What did you mean by a black dog?" John blinked. "It means a black dog." Harry's face tightened. He'd seen a black dog before, and the mention of it made him uncomfortable. Ron came up beside him, angry and defensive. "Hermione told you, didn't she?" he snapped. "Her cat ate my scabbers, and she still won't admit it. She's always so self-righteous, just like the time she got the firebolt confiscated." Hermione, walking back toward them, heard Ron and looked up, her face darkening. She turned away, hurt. John's face grew stern, his tone cut through the cafeteria. "Ron, that was over the line. The firebolt's origin was unknown. Did you want Harry to fall out of the sky?" The rebuke left Ron speechless. John continued, "Sirius Black is looking for Harry. Sometimes you should think things through 3 times before you say them." Ron stammered, glanced at Harry, and had no answer. Harry opened his mouth to defend himself, but John raised a hand to stop him. "Is trust really that hard?" he asked. The Slytherins nearby suppressed cheers at the sight of a Slytherin-leaning boy admonishing a Gryffindor. John tried to reason with them. "How long have you known Hermione? Would she be jealous of your firebolt? Think." Malfoy watched the exchange with glee and crowed to Flint, who stood nearby. "See? I told you John's a Slytherin." Flint had once claimed John favored Gryffindor, but this scene pleased Malfoy. The argument was ugly, but John trusted that once tempers cooled, the others would see sense. Afterward, John went to Hagrid's hut. Hagrid greeted him awkwardly, in a suit that looked terribly ill-fitting, and there were large garments on the table, big enough to be someone's blankets. "You're here, John. I told Wai you were looking for a unicorn horn, and she said she'd give one." That reminded John, the unicorn from the Forbidden Forest he'd let go. He'd even been given a horn before. "Thanks, Hagrid. I'll take it," John said, waving and nodding as he left. As he walked away, he pointed at Hagrid's beard. "You might want to trim it. You'd look more capable." Hagrid laughed and waved him off. Hagrid had long since accepted John's excursions into the Forbidden Forest. John followed the familiar path. After walking deeper in, a white unicorn stepped out. He recognized her at once. The unicorn pressed her muzzle to his palm. John felt a strange stiffening inside himself. He didn't flatter himself as particularly pure, but the animal's trust unsettled him in a good way. Wei, the unicorn, stopped and glanced back at him, signaling for him to follow. John wasn't afraid, and he followed her tracks deeper into the forest. Chapter 131. The Forbidden Forest is home to unicorns. It had stood long before Hogwarts was founded and sheltered countless magical creatures. As a certain century dawned, rumors of these beings spread far and wide and attracted all manner of would-be heroes and flatterers wanting to win the king's favor. Tales of dragons hoarding treasure sent knights after them. Stories of fairies with bewitching voices spawned a new trade in circus impresarios and captors. Unicorns fared slightly better. Their beauty and sacred aura made them objects of reverence more than exploitation. Still, people sought them out to prove the old legends true. The legends weren't all wrong. Unicorns' aversion to the dark arts was very real. John had once used fiendfire in their presence. By rights, the herd should have turned on him. Yet, when he followed Wai deeper into the forest, they came upon a secluded glade, trees and lush grass, branches heavy with great fruit, a clear stream running through, and many unicorns grazing together. Centaurs watched from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, and John couldn't help wondering whether centaurs preferred human or equine company. One unicorn stood out. Bigger than the others, gleaming white with a thick spiraled horn, It carried itself with the kind of authority that made trees seem fragile. When Wei Wei saw it, she trotted forward and nudged her horn against its side, like a spoiled child greeting her father. John had to admit he was surprised when a deep baritone filled his head. "Are you the student who saved Wei Wei?" It wasn't that the unicorn had spoken aloud. Some kind of magic made its thoughts audible. John saw a golden mark on the unicorn's flank, an ancient sigil. Ancient creatures could carry old magics of their own. He bowed politely. "My name is John Wick. Thank you. I'm honored to be allowed into your herd's habitat." The great unicorn lowered his head. "I am Clark. Thank you for saving my daughter." Clark examined John and narrowed his gaze at the man's right hand. He lowered his head, and the spiraled horn shone with a cool, silvery light like moonlight. The glow washed over John's arm. He felt the absence in his soul there being mended, slowly knitting itself back together. When the light faded, Clark said with effort, "Your soul has been damaged. This is all I can do." "Thank you." The tremor in John's hand was much reduced. The blessing had been far stronger than any soul potion he had tried, worthy of something ancient and sacred. Wei Wei, encouraged by her father's approval, nudged John gently with her head. Clark chuckled and relayed the message. "She's inviting you inside. There is something there you will need." They ducked through the hollow of an enormous tree, and John found himself in a cavern filled with light. Piled in a glittering mound were thousands of unicorn horns, each glowing with its own hue. Wei Wei touched John's forehead with her horn, and a clear, feminine tone came into his mind. "This is where unicorns shed their horns. Take any you need." John stared. The pile must have been tens of thousands of horns, amassed over centuries. The hollow tree sheltered this herd like a living vault. Despite being hollow, it pulsed with life, and the plants at its base shone with an inner light. John wasn't sentimental. He was low on horns. Components were hard to come by, and he picked through the pile. Some horns had aged into jade-like hardness, others shimmered like gems. It was a treasure that, if sold off, could change the wizarding economy. He chose 10 horns, and from a length of gold and jeweled chain, fashioned a long necklace which he placed around Wei Wei's neck. He had enchanted the pendant with a shield charm that would steadily restore a small amount of magic, useful for sustained casting. Wei Wei pressed her forehead to his in childish delight. "Then we are friends, John," she said. Clark watched with approval. A younger unicorn fretted from the edge of the clearing. "Clark, that human touched a soul." Clark was unconcerned. He was kind, he said simply. As king of the herd, Clark could see the wound in John's spirit and sense the chaotic magic tangled within him. He did not object. Before leaving the forest, Wei Wei taught John how to share thoughts. The unicorn's method was a kind of mind magic, a precursor to legilimency. In fact, many of the earliest wizarding arts had been learned from magical creatures. Dragons taught fire, unicorns taught mind-linking, the strange sphere birds taught apparition. The rise of wizards had been built on learning from those older magics. Merlin himself was said to have learned from beasts. John wondered whether ancient magics were the true origin of inherited talents. Natural parseltongue or born legilimens, powers etched into bloodlines rather than learned. By the time John emerged from the Forbidden Forest, it was nearly dark. Hagrid's cottage glowed on the edge of the trees. Peering in, John found Hagrid bent over stacks of papers, case notes Hermione had compiled for him. Hagrid was grateful, though John noticed Hermione and Harry were still in a cold war of their own. Fang lifted his head at their approach. John pressed a finger to his lips and the dog lowered it again. John waved and set off for the castle. Inside the grounds, a curfew warding chimed. The castle's monitoring magic had been triggered. Such wards took effect after lights out. John brought up the Marauders map with a flick of a finger and grinned as parchment lines unrolled and inked themselves into familiar form. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." A black dot with tiny footprints hurried toward Gryffindor Tower. A name curled above it, Sirius Black. "He's still here." John was out the door. He planned to take a shortcut, but Sirius was fast, slipping the same hidden rotes. John reached the portrait landing to see the portrait of Sir Cadogan swing wide and a shabby, dark-haired man bolt out and run down the stairs. As he ran, his body blurred and shifted, the man compressed, fur sprouting, and a huge black dog shot past John and disappeared into the Gryffindor common room. At the same moment, Ron's voice cut through the commotion, high and terrified. Black! Sirius Black! He had a knife! Gryffindor descended into chaos. The Weasley twins took the commotion as license for more mischief, while Professor McGonagall slammed the portrait door shut and tried to restore order. She was glad by instinct when the house rejoiced, but tonight order was paramount. She turned on the occupants glaringly. Percy, as head boy, bore the brunt. I didn't approve it, Professor, Percy protested, indignant and red-faced. I was about to tell them all to bed. It was Ron. He woke me up screaming. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron snapped back, shaking. Professor, I saw Sirius Black standing by my bed. He'd a knife, McGonagall stared. How could he have come through the portrait hole? She demanded. Ask him. Ron pointed toward Sir Cadogan. Ask him if he let anyone in. McGonagall pushed the portrait open and flung the question. Sir Cadogan's voice rang out, proud and imperious. Of course, my noble lady. I kept strict watch. What makes a true knight is obedience to orders. The portrait's proclamation left the common room in stunned silence. McGonagall's face went a shade paler. You did that? She said, incredulous. Was it deliberate or by accident? Chapter 132. He has the password. Sir Cadogan crowed, puffing out his chest. A week's worth of passwords, my lady. He read them off a scrap of paper. It was intentional. Professor McGonagall wiped the fury from her face with a handkerchief, her eyes wide, her mouth set in a hard line. She hurried back toward the common room, pale. Who, she asked, voice trembling, is the utter idiot who wrote down this week's password and left it lying around? Two faces immediately drained of color. Neville trembled and raised his hand. In a small voice, he said, Sorry, Professor. I can't remember the password. He looked as if he wanted to sink through the floor. McGonagall glared at him, furious at the lapse in memory. There wasn't time to deal with him now. The castle needed to be searched. In the crowd, Hermione gripped a book so hard her knuckles were white. Her face had gone pale. She had written the note too, and she had given it to John. John, meanwhile, had the Marauder's map in hand and his mind fixed on the little black dot moving through the castle. He followed it relentlessly. This guy is fast, he thought. No matter how much exercise he'd had, he couldn't keep up with Sirius Black on foot. There was only one way. He activated his meteor shoes. The shoes glowed and his speed surged. The staircases were awkward to accelerate on, but once he hit level ground, he let loose. Within 10 seconds, his distance to the black dot closed dramatically. He passed a spiral staircase and launched himself down. A soft magic lifted him, one of Hogwarts' protections against falling, and he closed farther on the dot. The chase threaded through corridors both men knew intimately. John was gaining, and the dot moved toward an exit. A large black dog burst out of the castle, followed by a blur of movement. Filch stumbled out behind them, looking desperate and breathless, too slow to be of any use. John didn't notice Filch. His eyes were on Sirius. Continuing to run would have taken Sirius out of the map's range. John didn't hesitate. He poured another charge of power into the meteor shoes and became nothing but a streak. Ahead, the big black dog was slowing, panting, clearly tiring. Black and shaggy, bear-like Sirius. John closed the gap. At 10 meters, he launched himself with everything he had. The force of the leap gouged the turf. A shockwave swept the air. His kick struck the dog in the waist. Whether dog or human, disable first. Sirius hadn't found whatever he'd been looking for, and he was running for his life. If he hadn't fled, he would have been caught by Aurors. As a former king of pranks and one of the few students who had really learned the castle's secrets, he knew the passages well. He'd planned to use them to get away, then ditch to the Forbidden Forest and hide in a spot he'd prepared. He'd also gotten used to being fed by people around the school, and the extra food had put a little weight on him. Running showed it. John's kick hit home. The impact sent Sirius flying. He rolled across the ground several times and slammed into the fence at the forest's edge. When he staggered upright, he coughed blood, flecks of tissue and mucus at the corners of his mouth. He stared at John in disbelief. Bones broken, he thought. The force had to have shattered him. But Sirius was an animagus. His canine form and his animagus constitution had taken some of the blow. He bit down on his tongue, pain sharpening his senses. Trembling, The big black dog rose and fixed his gaze on John. John hadn't expected the animagus's resilience. For a moment he hesitated, then drew his wand and pointed it at the panting dog. "Sirius Black," he said coldly. "Transform, or I'll make you." Under John's steady stare, the blag stood up, the animal blurred, muscles shifting and shrinking, fur smoothing into human shape. Sirius's true face emerged, gaunt and pallid, long greasy hair curling like a dirty version of Professor Snape's, his skin a waxy pale. He looked like someone who had slept poorly for a long time. His grin showed yellowed teeth and the stench of bad breath. "John Wick," Sirius rasped, hand pressed to a caved-in left side, blood darkening his sleeve. He was in bad shape. John eyed him. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. Sirius sneered. "You may be a very good wizard," he said, a sharp, malicious light in his eyes, "but don't underestimate an adult." He produced a wand. John frowned. Where had Sirius gotten a wand? It looked unsettlingly familiar, as if it had once belonged in John's own home. John didn't lower his guard. He believed in striking first. White light burst from his wand. Sirius answered in kind. The edge of the forbidden forest became their battlefield. 12 years away from casting hadn't dulled Sirius's talent. The moment he took up a wand, his hands remembered the spells. He thrust his wand and barked, "Petrificus totalis." John dodged and moved to counter. White magic struck the earth between them, throwing up clods and leaving a crater. The duel became a rapid exchange of spells and quick thinking. John's transfiguration came into play. He flicked his wand, and the fence near Sirius writhed, the wood reshaping into a constricting python that wrapped around one ankle and nearly sent him down. Sirius reacted by slamming the ground with a spell. The turf turned into sucking marsh and tried to pull John in. "Incendio," John snapped, and a jet of fire dried the swamp. Flames curled and leapt around him as he pulled himself free. He shaped the fire, fanning it into a wall that encircled Sirius. Sirius didn't panic. He wrenched the fractured fence into a shield and raised it as protection. He cast Finite Incantatem, but the flames only tightened, twisting into a furious spinning column. John fed wind into it, and the ring became a raging fire tornado. As the fire collapsed, it left several charred shields where Sirius had tried to shelter. Seeing his chance, John lunged toward the gap near the fence. A massive black dog, hidden in the shadows, snapped at his ankle. The bite was brutal, as if it wanted to take his leg off. John bit back the pain and swung, punching the beast's face and sending it tumbling. Sirius completed a hurried transformation and leveled his wand at John. John was quicker. "Levicorpus!" he cried. The spell caught Sirius off guard. With a strangled noise, Sirius was flung backward and hung upside down from a tree, suspended by magic. Before he could fully recover, John barked, "Expelliarmus!" A jet of red light struck Sirius. His wand spun from his hand and flew through the air toward John. He snatched it out of the sky. John slid his hand into his pocket as if it were the most casual thing in the world, wand already leveled at Sirius. "You should come with me." He stepped closer, wand steady. Sirius, hanging upside down, laughed. "Your charms are impressive. Thanks for the compliment." John kept his face impassive, every sense on edge. The upside-down Sirius, however, seemed suddenly looser, more talkative. "Who taught you your charms?" he asked. "Is it important?" John wanted him to shut up. Why was he so chatty? "Of course it is," Sirius chuckled. "Snevellus taught him. Severus Snape created that one. He's a professor at the school, my dean," Sirius added, as if that settled it. John went cold. "Him? He actually became the head of Slytherin? If you're so familiar with Professor Snape, I don't mind turning you over to him," Sirius said with a sneer. John's thoughts flickered to the murder their dean had mentioned. "What's your connection to Remus Lupin?" The name made Sirius pause. He recovered quickly. "Remus? He used to be a friend. That was a long time ago." John fixed him with a look. "Professor Snape mentioned a murder once. You know what happened?" "Murder? He actually said that?" Sirius understood instantly and cursed. "He followed us. James saved him." John barely raised an eyebrow, urging him to go on. Sirius obliged reluctantly. "It was a prank. Severus Snape was unbearable at school. We hated him." When Sirius said Remus went, he tried to pass over the details. John caught the hint. "A prank? If you mean Remus turning into a werewolf on the full moon, that's not an ordinary prank." Sirius's eyes widened. He hadn't expected John to know Remus's condition. Before Sirius could react further, John raised his wand, a silent command to continue. Sirius had no choice. Remus would go to the Shrieking Shack on the full moon, he said. At the time, Severus Snape wanted to catch us, so I told him the knot to stop the Humping Willow. I wanted him to come. He left the rest unspoken. John filled in the blanks. Snape, rushing to catch them, would have found the Shrieking Shack filled with a helpless, raging werewolf. Even if Snape had somehow survived, his life would have been ruined, cursed to join the hated, shunned ranks of lycanthropes. John narrowed his eyes. That doesn't sound very funny. Sirius, prepared for recrimination, grinned as if daring him. So are you going to avenge your dean? John's answer was cold and flat. Why not? A white light constricted at the tip of John's wand. A deadly bell rang somewhere in Sirius's chest. He would die. Without hesitation, he dropped, quickly changed into a large dog, and bolted. The tree John struck with a shattering spell exploded from within. Sirius had known the counterspell to the headstand. John had not expected that, and had to move to pursue. A shout cut through the night. Hagrid. Who's there? Hagrid wasn't far from his hut and had been alerted. He came out with his crossbow, drawing John's attention long enough for Sirius to vanish into the darkness. He was waiting for this, John muttered, glancing up as an Auror approached, accompanied by a Dementor. He had underestimated how far someone capable of escaping Azkaban could reach. John slipped a disillusionment charm over himself and sprinted into the Forbidden Forest. The scuffle had already drawn Aurors to investigate. From the forest, he took the Slytherin entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, and when he emerged inside the castle, the professor's searching feet had already passed. He did not return to his dormitory that night. Instead, he spent the night in the Constellation Society chamber, and at dawn walked out as if nothing had happened. What had happened the night before had shaken Ron to his core. Aurors were talking to Professor McGonagall. Another was scanning the corridors. Filch hovered nearby. Ron was certain he'd seen Sirius Black and had run like the wind. Sir Cadogan had been tossed out of Gryffindor Tower for good measure. The fat lady had returned to her portrait, and a contingent of bumbling troll guards was now patrolling the corridors. Harry and Ron made their way to the 4th floor, to the passage that linked Honeydukes to the castle. Ron scoffed nervously. He wouldn't come in through Honeydukes. If he'd broken into the sweets shop, we would have heard it, Ron added, trying to sound nonchalant. Harry was relieved. It meant they might still go to Hogsmeade without the professors shutting everything down. Then Harry stopped. Ron followed his gaze, confused. The door John had been at was shut, and John had left the area. Harry didn't know why he felt the need to hide, just an instinct that he didn't want John to see him. Ron peered at the closed door. John? What's he doing there? Looking for Sirius? Maybe he stayed there all night, Harry said. They hurried over and pushed the door open. Inside was nothing, just the same empty room as before. Ron was annoyed at the wasted excitement. There's nothing here. We might as well go fly a firebolt. But Harry was distracted, frowning at the unexplained absence. What was John hiding? Treasure? Something? Or someone? Secret? He remembered asking Ron if Black was rich. Ron had answered, very rich. It fit with John's lavish spending. The thought nagged at Harry. John had money he spent without visible source. Later, word of the previous night's events turned into a spectacle. Ron became famous overnight for his terrified story. For the first time, he had more attention than Harry. He practiced the tale with all the flair of a storyteller. I was sleeping, and I heard this ripping sound. I thought I was dreaming. A cold wind woke me up, and one side of my bed curtain was torn down. Before he could go on, someone shouted, "Look, a dog doing a handstand outside." A crowd surged out. A beagle stood on its front paws in the corner of the corridor, simultaneously ridiculous and pitiful, making the girls coo and wish to help it. But after glancing at the cold-faced Slytherins nearby, most lost their nerve. The Weasley twins arrived, pale as ghosts. My goodness, is that John's? He dotes on that dog. What happened? Everyone knew John as the dog's biggest fan. To find him punishing the animal felt oddly shocking. Some even whispered that this John might be an imposter. Draco Malfoy, seeing the commotion, hurried over, covering a bruised eye, berating Goyle and Crabbe. "You know he's real, don't you?" Goyle and Crabbe shook their heads so fast, Goyle almost laughed. Malfoy drew his wand, scaring them into scrambling away. Daphne Greengrass pushed forward with Pansy Parkinson. She met John's hard expression and, with a touch of concern, asked about the dog, Tom. John's lips curled in a cold smile, unmoved by the dog's watery, pleading eyes. What had happened? The dog had stolen his spare wand and handed it to Sirius. He should have seen it coming. Fang had already come begging for attention because he wasn't getting enough food. Tom had been kept outside the castle, and not just any stray. He'd been sheltering a wanted man. Don't plead for it, John warned. His rare sternness silenced Daphne. She and Pansy exchanged a look. Did you feed it something odd? Pansy asked. No, Daphne said. I haven't even started the new dish I'm learning, strawberry mapo tofu. Their eyes asked the obvious. If it hadn't eaten anything strange, then what had made John so furious? They didn't know what John knew, how hard the dog had bitten him, how close he'd come to serious injury. If his constitution hadn't been exceptional, that bite might have taken him off his feet. Leaving Tom to do a handstand in the corridor until class, John turned away, a flash of ferocity in his gaze. The last time he had looked that disheveled was when spiders had chased him out of the dark forest. Nobody dared question him further. Ron, still stinging that his thunder had been stolen, tried to ask if John had found out about whatever they'd done that morning. Did John see us go into that room? Harry shook his head. Impossible. He didn't go in. By the end of the day, John's limp was hard to ignore. After class, he went to get his leg treated. It was a simple solution where money could do the talking. 100 galleons later, the healing spells had done their work. He left with his pain soothed and, as always, his money charm intact. John rubbed at an old ache where there was no visible wound, the kind of pain that was more memory than injury. The cost still stung, and for a moment he wondered if there were middlemen even in goblin magic. He walked briskly toward the edge of the forbidden forest and stared at the tree he had smashed the night before. It seemed Sirius had held back. John replayed the fight in his head. Sirius hadn't used outright attack charms, only spells to restrain and disarm. The bite he'd taken afterward felt like a desperate act. With that in mind, he pushed deeper into the trees. Just before he stepped in, he paused and turned when he caught Luna's gaze. "Luna, what are you doing here?" he asked. She seemed a little spaced out, speaking in that airy sing-song of hers. "I'm looking for a crumple-horned snorkack. There are lots of nargles on Longbottom, so I came out." John blinked. Luna pointed at his face. "You have a lot of nargles, too," she intoned. He tried to use insight and saw nothing. "They're invisible," she said, as though answering his thoughts. "They float into your ears and muddle your brain. Now they've flown away." John had been oddly unfocused earlier. Luna's presence steadied him. He smiled. There was something brotherly in it, though he had no sister. Luna skipped to his side. He glanced down at her small, pale feet, stained with mud. "Were your shoes hiding again?" he asked, frowning. "My shoes are magical." She replied without concern. "They play hide-and-seek when I fall asleep." John considered, then nodded. "All right, I'll give you a pair that won't play hide-and-seek." Luna's face brightened. She rarely smiled so plainly. John produced his wand, summoned clear water, and washed the mud from her feet. Then he took off his own shoes and handed them to her. He tapped the leather with his wand. The oversized shoes shrank to fit her perfectly. John stood barefoot, shrugging. "There, they won't hide now. You can rest easy." Luna examined the meteor shoes carefully, her mood lifting even more. As they walked back toward Ravenclaw Tower, John barefoot, Luna beside him, he asked, "What is a crumple-horned snorkack anyway?" "It lives in Sweden," she said dreamily. "It can't fly. Its horns are curved, like a small calf." Her voice trailed through the empty trees like a song. Passing students in the grounds noticed John walking barefoot with Luna and smirked. A few Ravenclaws mouthed, "Loony." A pressure from Luna's composure made several of them jump and scurry away. Luna simply turned and waved. John left her at Ravenclaw Tower and headed for Snape's office. He scanned Snape's hair as he opened the door. No better than Sirius's, he thought. Snape's expression was flat. He looked down at John's muddy feet for a long moment. Then John said, "So Professor Lupin wasn't the only one involved in that murder, was he?" Snape raised an eyebrow, impatience in his voice. "I told you, John Wick, that Lupin is not a good man." He was with Sirius Black, John said, and with Harry Potter's father. Snape's sarcasm sharpened. All that trouble just to discover that? Mr. Wick, you disappoint me. John stepped closer. Then, the person who was murdered, was it you, Professor? He said calmly. The last words cut deep. Snape's face darkened, a muscle twitched in his cheek. For the first time John had ever seen, Snape lost his composure. He tightened his jaw, and a swirl of emotion passed over his features. Anger, bitterness, something like grief, then something close to the murderous rage he must have felt toward the boys who made his life hell. John watched those expressions change until they settled into a cold, controlled mask. "Where did you meet him?" Snape asked, his voice finally steadier. Reason prevailed. Whatever fury Snape felt, he forced it down. He knew Sirius Black was dangerous. "The Forbidden Forest," John said, "but I don't want the Aurors involved." Snape narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand what you're dealing with, John? No one at this school would willingly rush into a hero's drama with you." John looked him straight in the eye. "Isn't Professor here too? Don't you think how suspicious it was that Sirius ended up at Ron Weasley's bed last night? He gained access to Gryffindor Tower. There must be an inside accomplice. Would someone like him not know where Harry Potter is?" Snape's face grew thoughtful, a sneer touching his mouth. "And the muggle that was blown up, do you believe he was innocent?" "He escaped Azkaban to kill Harry Potter," John said flatly. Disgust crossed Snape's features at the name of Sirius Black. "Then we should, of course, capture Sirius Black and find out the truth." He looked almost as if he was daring John to say otherwise. "You know Sirius isn't the kind of man who'd have picked the wrong bed," John added. Snape's initial instinct to have the Aurors drag Sirius away to kiss a Dementor warred with a more pressing curiosity. He eyed John long and hard, the sarcasm returning but tempered by something else. "You expect me to help you?" "That would help the school," John said evenly. "And it would help Harry Potter." Snape's sneer faltered. He said nothing further, only sent John away with a look that meant this was far from over. John left thinking that, however tsundere the man was, he would not stand apart. For Snape, the urge to confront an old enemy was as good a motive as any. Back in the Great Hall, John ate less and less. Where he used to clear his plate, now he sipped water and nibbled bread. He had hollowed cheeks. He was thinning as if by deliberate austerity. A flock of owls arrived and burst the quiet when one dropped a howler onto Neville Longbottom's table. Neville, who'd bulked up in recent months, his once round face narrowed, his arms now corded with muscle, turned instantly back to his old self when the howler opened. The shrill voice of his grandmother filled the hall. Molly Weasley would have been proud. Malfoy watched, smirking, until John added a particularly grueling running drill to his routine. The smugness vanished into pain as Malfoy found himself improving. He protested, but secretly he liked getting stronger. A notice on the bulletin board announced Hogsmeade would be open next week. Later, John ran into Filch, who was inexplicably wrapped in sandbags, skulking about in a rage. "What happened?" John asked. Filch scowled. "I lost to a student the other day. He used inertia to corner me. He moved so fast I only saw black hair and a school uniform." John managed a small smile and kept his mouth shut. Hardware upgrades had limits, but some secrets were better left unsaid. Filch, humiliated by being humiliated in the House Cup and determined to regain his dignity, no longer paid much attention to John. Instead, he paced the corridors like a man possessed, muttering about speed and victory. Chapter 135. John shook his head and headed for the edge of the Forbidden Forest. There, Professor Snape waited, long black robes billowing like wings as he moved. He approached John quickly and said flatly, "I hope we can find him before dark." John had no way to control the situation, but seeing that expression, he swallowed his reply and nodded. The two fell into an uneasy silence as they stepped into the trees. It wasn't John's first time in the forest, but it was his first time searching it with Snape. They walked like strangers, barely speaking, though John could feel Snape's subtle, calculating gaze on him the whole way. At a trampled clearing, John knelt to inspect a bloodstain. He knew Sirius Black had been here. "He's injured," Snape observed, shifting his attention from the blood to John, his face unreadable. "You hurt him?" The notion that a young wizard who hadn't even graduated had wounded a former Death Eater who'd served time in Azkaban sat in Snape's mind like a challenge. He knew Sirius's reputation, talented, reckless, aura level before his imprisonment. Even weakened by years in Azkaban, Sirius would still be a formidable opponent. For a moment, Snape's thoughts took a dangerous turn. If John had ambitions to become something like a third Dark Lord, then... But John's eyes met his, and the dangerous line of thought was cut off as both men startled. John composed himself and said calmly, he held back. He didn't use any unforgivable curses or harmful charms. Snape nodded, as if the emotion had never been there. They followed the trail of blood until it disappeared into the hollow of an old tree. He ran, John said. Inside the hollow, John found a bit of dried chicken, leftover camp food dragged in by someone on the run. From the tracks and remnants, he guessed Sirius had run through the night and carried some rations with him. Crucially, John was confident the man hadn't left the forest, which made the hunt easier. For the next while, John and Snape moved in tacit partnership, polite, silent, efficient. They found several makeshift dens and signs of life, but each time the trail ended and the person had slipped away. With that kind of reconnaissance and ability to vanish into the woods, it was no wonder the Aurors had failed to catch him. Meanwhile, back at Hagrid's hut, Harry and Ron had been invited in. Hagrid was awkwardly playing peacemaker, trying to imitate John's gentle manner. Hermione had been helping look after Buckbeak these past days, and Hagrid could see the strain between the trio. He underestimated Ron's stubbornness, though. Ron was furious and insisted Hermione send Crookshanks away before any reconciliation could happen. As a fellow animal lover, Hagrid sympathized with Hermione. He knew instincts ran deep in creatures, but it didn't make Ron any more reasonable. Later, because it was Hogsmeade weekend, Snape put the search on hold for the day. John watched him hurry off through the castle, likely to intercept another student, and folded the Marauders map away. He headed instead to the Constellation Society's chamber. He hadn't spent much time there this week. Malfoy had borrowed the firebolt that usually sat in the Society and claimed it as a secret weapon. John had noticed Malfoy's frequent returns to his dormitory with fresh bruises, probably from careless falls. In the round chamber, 36 purple stars studded the dome and cast a star map onto the central table. With a snap, the table split to reveal a hidden armory. Half-finished shoes were drying on a bench, a rack of spell ring devices lined a counter, and the silver-veined sword hung prominently on the wall. John raised a hand, and the sword trembled a few times before flying into his grasp. He picked up a bottle of prepared soul potion and drank it. He planned a daring experiment, a soul infusion. From a cabinet, he retrieved a peeled pure soul, the artifact of the ritual, and as the potion took hold, a silvery ring flowed over his skin, attaching itself to his right arm like water. The shimmering silver hand moved, temporarily suppressing the injury on his right hand. John set the soul on the table, spoke in an ancient, obscure tongue, and the syllables began to pull the soul apart thread by thread. It unspooled and slithered toward the sword, wrapping itself around the blade. Light burst through the chamber. John felt magic drain as the weapon trembled. Then the process reached a violent point. The sword shuddered as if the soul inside it resisted splitting. John felt his own soul strain with it. "Soul, return!" he forced out, pressing the spell down as the sword's captive essence writhed. Power coalesced into the room, a pressure dropping over him like weather. The sword suddenly acted of its own will, floating out of his hand. John drew his wand with his free hand. Above, the 36 crystals in the dome flashed to life, their guided streams of light striking his wand and transforming it into a blazing, purple-tinged conduit. The power flooded through him. His arm was pressed down by the force, and the wand became so full it corroded his left sleeve and left electric, lightning-like patterns across his skin. He forced control. Projections of his past spells flickered about him as he steadied the wand and aimed a white, etching beam at the sword. The beam burned patterns into the mithril body as he used his body as the necessary channel to drive vast power into the blade. The struggle lasted more than 10 brutal minutes. Several times the sword almost tore free, its internal soul screaming in a voice John felt in his teeth, but the restraining glove held. When the wand finally emptied, it exhaled a puff of black smoke and fell silent. John's left sleeve hung shredded, His arm bore those strange, scar-like marks, but the sword, the silver vein, glowed with a new intensity. Silver light licked along it, flames and electric arcs danced across the surface, and arcane, ancient patterns had been etched into the metal. The magic crystal at the hilt had cracked but held. He tested it. Sweeping the blade toward a training figure in the chamber, the weapon cut cleanly through, the edges scorched but precise. "It works," John breathed, "but I don't know how long this super magic crystal will last." When he returned the sword to its place, it did not sit inert. Instead, it flew into his hand without prompting. The injected soul had been given a consciousness, formed and shaped by the supercrystal fashioned from the 36 dome crystals. In essence, he had forced a soul into a weapon and given it a mind. He felt the moral weight of what he'd done. It had touched on forbidden ground, but in the privacy of the chamber, it felt like a line crossed only he knew about. Upstairs, the dome's crystals glowed dimmer. John didn't worry. The chamber functioned as a kind of alchemical furnace. With the smallest trickle of ambient magic as a medium, the room would slowly replenish the crystals. If they filled, excess magic could even create more crystals. As founder and designer of the Constellation Society, John had built the chamber with redundancy, like the Room of Requirement. He checked the galleons in his hand as they paid for repairs and watched the damaged items around him stitch themselves back together. He examined his left hand. The lightning patterns looked almost like tattoos. For a moment, he saw a flash of a thunderbird in his memory. The impact of the infusion had left an imprint across him, part of the price paid for channeling so much power. When he walked out of the chamber, he saw Harry at the statue of the one-eyed, humpbacked witch, sweat beading on his forehead. Professor Snape had him in hand and glared as Harry protested that he hadn't been to Hogsmeade. It did no good. Snape took him off to his office. John watched for a moment, then turned away. He almost ran into Hermione a few steps down the corridor. Her hair was plastered to her forehead from hurry. She looked desperate. "John," she started, then stopped, uncertain. He could see she was anxious. "What is it?" he asked. Hermione glanced at the troll guard posted nearby and bit her lip. "Can we go somewhere private?" John scratched his head and nodded. Around the corner, Daphne, who had been about to greet him, halted as her smile fell away, and the pineapple pizza she'd been carrying slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. Hermione led the way, John following close behind. John kept glancing at the lightning-shaped pattern on the back of his hand. It looked almost attractive in a savage sort of way, intimidating, not unlike Harry's scar, but with a strange beauty to it. When they reached the covered bridge, Hermione finally spoke after a long silence. She stared at him for a moment, then asked, hopeful, "John, where's that password note I gave you?" John blinked. He remembered the fight with Sirius Black. He'd used a fire spell to dry the swamp, and the paper had gone up in ash. "It's gone," he said honestly. "It burned." Hermione didn't expect that. Her expression collapsed into disbelief. After a long pause, she simply turned and walked away without another word. John watched her go, puzzled, then shrugged to himself and joked under his breath about whether she meant he couldn't feed the cat anymore. He had more pressing concerns, finding Sirius Black, and little spare time. As he left the bridge, he bumped into Daphne Greengrass. She was in a surprisingly good mood, practically glowing with pride as she grabbed his sleeve. "I've learned to make pineapple pizza and Heavenly Dynasty strawberry dumplings," she announced, beaming. John tried not to wince. Pineapple pizza? Strawberry dumplings? He'd known she'd been studying cooking for a couple of years, but this was unexpected. He smiled politely and moved on. Aftermath and Valentine's Day. John had underestimated the cost of meddling with forbidden things. At first, it was only small, golden quills appearing on his forearms. He thought it was something stuck to his skin and tried to brush them off. When plucking one produced a sharp sting and it came away in his hand, the truth was unavoidable. Within a day, the quills had spread into full golden feathers all over his arms and chest. He brewed a potion for it, but it had no effect. The obvious explanation settled coldly into his thoughts. His wand core was a thunderbird feather, and with so much raw power channeled through it during his last fight, a transfiguration had leached into him. "Am I turning into a bird?" he muttered, half amused, half horrified. there were some unexpected advantages. He discovered he could influence the weather in a small area. Sudden lightning arced and struck at Malfoy's feet, making the Draco jump. John lazily opened one eye and said flatly, "2 more laps." Malfoy, exhausted, glanced at Neville walking away and gritted his teeth. He forced his tired legs forward, dragging a stone the size of a human head as if his spine might snap. Heavy footsteps left 2 lines in the turf by the Black Lake. John flexed his now thinner fingers and watched electric sparks crawl along his fingertips. He didn't know whether to be grateful or alarmed. It felt like a free infusion of magic, a kind of untamed magic blood, but the side effects were severe. He certainly didn't want to sprout a beak. Pulling up his sleeve, he saw the golden feathers growing under his shirt and sighed. He had 2 plans: either use a powerful animagus grade transfiguration to reshape himself, or wait until the end of the semester and try to purge the Thunderbird bloodline when the bulk of the magic blood could be flushed out. Either way, patience was required. He might lose the new ability when the bloodline was cleared, and maybe that was for the best. Becoming a bird-faced man was not something he fancied. He grinned at the thought of Voldemort's famously absent nose and mocked himself with a little joke. If Voldemort had hidden a Horcrux in his nose, John would never find it, because there wasn't one to look in. Valentine's Day arrived, mercifully without Lockhart and his ridiculous costumed cupids. In the Great Hall, a few Slytherins who knew John whistled and made eyes. It had become tacitly accepted that this holiday belonged to John. Today was his turn as the butt of their jokes. Malfoy even stood and announced with a grand theatrical sneer, "Anyone who wants to send a letter to John, I can deliver it for you." A ripple of laughter ran through the hall. The Weasley twins leaned in with conspiratorial grins, clearly thinking of some prank. John assumed Malfoy's offer was mere wind, until a folded paper crane fluttered and landed neatly in front of him. Whistles rose like a chorus. John unfolded the crane. Inside, written in neat, emerald green ink, was handwriting he recognized instantly, the same handwriting as the letter he'd received last year. He'd kept that first letter tucked away in his drawer. He folded this one and slipped it into his pocket with a calm that sent Malfoy's smirk snapping shut. Draco frowned and jabbed at Harry with his eyes, as if daring him to confess to some romance. Harry scowled back. "What sweetheart?" he spat, genuinely angry. Hermione, sitting close, soothed him quietly, and the rift between them healed again, like always. Their relationship had a habit of splitting into pieces and being skillfully kneaded back together. Ron's eyes bugged out, looking ready to jump at Malfoy on instinct. The mood in the hall briefly froze as memories of darker days flickered through their minds. Snape's bitter words, the Marauder's map almost destroyed, Hagrid's letter about the failed appeal for Buckbeak, and the terrible fear of execution. Tempers had flared, hexes nearly cast, Crabbe and Goyle ready to step in, but in the end, no duel broke out. The tension eased off as they all remembered how close things had come to worse. John, meanwhile, received more tangible tokens of affection, boxes of chocolates, some clearly tampered with. He could tell at a glance, level 5 alchemy didn't lie, that at least one confection contained a love potion. He tossed that one aside and warned the drooling Goyle to keep his hands off. Since he'd lost his sense of taste earlier, chocolate had become a waxy, pointless lump to him anyway, so he stashed the rest in his drawer. He kept them there on the off chance his taste might return someday. At least then he could try one of the little witch's recipes properly. Tom, his animal companion, had been punished recently and subdued, was behaving like a very well-trained dog. John, slightly exasperated, pulled out one of his 3 wands, a cherrywood one with a unicorn hair core, among a red oak with a thunderbird feather core, and a yew with dragon heartstring. He waved the unicorn wand playfully at Tom and scolded, "Honestly, 3-legged golden toads are rare, but 4-legged dogs are everywhere. Why do you only go soft for animagi?" Tom drooped his head and rested it on his paws, his big eyes full of innocent grievance. John couldn't help a fond, helpless sigh. He was glad he'd been the one to meet Sirius Black when it happened. If anyone else had run into him, it might have ended much worse. Basil, the snowy owl, sat on a cabinet nearby, watching Tom with a strict, unreadable gaze. If Tom stepped out of line, Basil was more than capable of rules enforcement. In the common room, a group of girls gathered and started whispering. As John walked in, a hand tugged his sleeve. He turned to find Daphne, chin lifted in proud possession, her whole posture declaring him as hers. Some of the other girls hesitated at once, retreating at the sight of her confidence. Pansy Parkinson brightened and stood beside Daphne as if to say, "Whoever dares touch my friend will answer to me." John looked from the hesitant faces to Daphne's triumphant little smile and felt a small, unfamiliar tremor run through him. Chapter 137. Understood. He was a little taller than Daphne, so he leaned down and murmured in the shell of her ear, "Did you make something to eat again?" His warm breath tickled her. Daphne's proud expression wavered, and a blush crept over her cheeks. John saw it and smiled, already guessing. It was a new dish. He looked enlightened, then grit his teeth. As long as it's not fruit-based, it's fine. He genuinely feared things like strawberry mapo tofu and strawberry dumplings. Couldn't she just leave the fruit alone? Daphne, thinking John had liked it, beamed and said, "How did you know I made Wellington beef with chocolate today?" John stared at her. One is steak, one is chocolate. How do you put them together? After being forced to eat a piece of Wellington beef with chocolate on Valentine's Day, John was completely numb. He had no idea who taught Daphne to cook like this. Most people aimed for balanced nutrition and a pleasing combination of color, aroma, and taste. Daphne seemed not to care about any of it. Her sense of flavor and nutrition was a complete mess. Who ate steak with chocolate? It was already calorific enough. Adding chocolate broke every calorie ceiling John knew. Only John, with his remarkably poor sense of taste, could stomach it. Even Heinrich, who'd sampled some, had shown a look of shocked admiration. Heinrich had gotten chocolate too. For a rare moment, a bit of color returned to his pale face when he unwrapped it and took a bite. Garlic-flavored. Rumor had it later that the Weasley twins were cornered in Gryffindor Tower, and if Professor McGonagall hadn't intervened, one of them might have ended up in the hospital wing. Time passed. Sirius Black was in hiding. John even suspected at one point that he might be in the Forbidden Forest. March 6th arrived. The sky was slate gray. Winter had given way, and every sleeping thing lay poised to wake. A heavy mood settled over the castle. The students did not like weather like this. John stood outside and looked up. He felt the time had come. Slinging his small bag over his shoulder, he headed into the Forbidden Forest, not to search for Sirius this time, but to wait for a storm. Influenced by the Thunderbird feather, John could feel a great downpour brewing in the dark clouds. He had to get to the place where the mixture was buried before the storm hit. After a year, the spider's nest, burned by fiendfire, remained barren. John stood at its entrance and waited for lightning. He took out his pocket watch. When it reached the half-hour mark, the first raindrop fell. Pea-sized drops splattered into his palm, then the clouds opened and the rain came in sheets. Steam rose off the ground and a flash of lightning split the sky. Boom. On the day of the awakening of insects, life stirred everywhere. The time had come. John dug where the mixture had been buried and revealed a bottle of blood-red potion. He had succeeded. Clutching the vial, he pushed through the downpour to the next chosen spot. The transformation needed a wide, light, safe place. Though the Forbidden Forest was full of creatures, no one came this far in the rain. John blew into his palms and a mist spread to cloak the area. Pointing his wand at his chest, he recited the incantation he'd memorized, Amato Animo Animato Animagus. Then he downed the blood-red potion in one gulp. Pain ripped through him. He doubled over, hands on his knees, as if bones were breaking to clear out marrow. A secondary heartbeat thudded in his ears. A chaotic consciousness crashed against his mind, but he forced it down. The first changes began in his hands. Sharp claws pushed through his fingernails. His clothes seemed to become scales, his pupils narrowed into vertical slits, and fangs tore through his lips. He grew taller, his breathing turned deep and foreign. His garments fused into his skin, something prickled along his spine, and spines pushed out one by one. Bat-like wings unfurled. Horns crowned his head and a tail lashed out, knocking down a sapling with ease. Eyes opened in the mist, brown, huge as lanterns. When he exhaled, a gout of flame burst from his mouth and startled him. He had become enormous, a dragon 50 feet long, probably the largest animagus anyone had seen. His dark green scales had the sheen of black jade. A gentle flap of his wings scattered the mist. He was not a native British green dragon. From his size and threat, he could have matched a Hungarian horntail, a burning rose in his throat. He opened his mouth and hurled a massive ball of fire down at the forest floor. The rain evaporated into steam where it struck. His vision stretched farther. Those lantern-sized eyes could see hundreds of meters. Rain pelted his scales. The solitary dragon towered above the woods. The animals nearby lowered themselves in fear. After a while, John closed his eyes and pictured his human form. His body shrank, the scales receding, the spines pulling back. When he opened his eyes again, he was himself once more. Rain soaked him. He picked up his wand from where he dropped it. Rolling up his sleeve, he found the Thunderbird feather on his left hand had disappeared. Good news, the feather's weather control remained somehow. With a light flick of his wand, he summoned an umbrella, and another touch sent water streaming off his clothes. Apart from damp hair, he looked the same as always. Walking out of the forbidden forest in the rain, John saw players in red cloaks practicing on the Quidditch pitch, not even pausing for the downpour. A black dog, soaked and bedraggled, trotted up and sniffed at a patch of earth that looked trampled by something huge. Fear flitted through its eyes. Sirius did not know what terror had been in the forest, but from the size and the animal's reaction, it had been at least dragon-sized. The forbidden forest contained many magical beasts, but no dragons. Sirius fell into thought. The final match between Slytherin and Gryffindor was due in April. Both teams trained as if their lives depended on it. Gryffindor's session ended when Wood was struck by lightning. Between many hands, Oliver Wood was carried into the hospital wing. John happened upon Harry rushing past, not noticing him. The Weasley twins joked that Harry was the castle's disaster, Wood was the pitch's disaster. Something always seemed to happen to him. It did not dampen Wood's passion, though. It simply proved it was true love. John paused and watched as Slytherin took over the pitch. Crabbe and Goyle stood like sentries at the entrance, barring entry, while the secret training young Master Malfoy strode in under everyone's gaze with his firebolt. The team now revolved almost entirely around Malfoy. Even Flint wielded less influence. "John, remember to cheer for us," someone called. John waved and left, squinting into the rain. The weather was perfect for what he had planned. Trouble at the Ministry of Magic flared up again. 3 Dementors had vanished almost overnight, and no one, Aurors included, had a lead. They were frantic. Odds screamed and pointed fingers at Sirius. John returned to the castle with the 3 Dementors he'd captured. He dismantled them with skilled precision. The souls he harvested were enough to heal his arm, and the ring he wore turned completely black. With a month to go until the match, Malfoy buried himself in training and began to underperform in class. John, on the other hand, stayed flawless. So perfect that Professor Flitwick, delighted in charms, awarded him 20 points. Hermione, though, looked exhausted. John hardly saw her in morning lessons, which seemed to please Daphne even more. By the afternoon, divination had dissolved into study hall. Hermione snapped, became unusually irritable, even spoke sharply to Professor Trelawney, and walked out of class. Trelawney's prediction, that someone would leave, had been fulfilled. With 4 days until Easter, John took a soul potion punctually each day. By Easter morning, the tremor in his hand had stopped, but his fingers were still a little stiff. The leftover soul potion was harmless enough. It would last until John's hand healed. He hadn't forgotten to look for Sirius either. From time to time, he shifted into his animagus form and prowled the grounds. Once he nearly startled a centaur in the Forbidden Forest, and he had left his scent in places that made Sirius Black wary. Scent is an important marker of territory in the wild, and John's random wanderings had convinced Sirius that something like a dragon was marking its boundaries. John had no idea that, though he hadn't found Sirius, he had scared him on more than one occasion. After that, he stopped searching in earnest. He carried the Marauder's map every day. Since others were actively looking too, it made more sense to stay put and wait than to wander aimlessly. Chapter 157. Firebolt and Firebolt. By April, the more sensible students were already preparing for exams. Tom chewed contentedly on a wand-shaped teething toy, one of the defective products from John's earlier ill-fated experiments. Rather than throw it away, John had given it to Tom as a chew toy. It had held up remarkably well. Tom had been gnawing on it for over a year, and it was still in one piece. Seeing the dog, grounded for 2 months, John picked up a book and left the table. Tom wagged his tail, wanting to follow, but Basil spread his wings in an exaggerated fan, and the dog backed off. When Daphne noticed John, she came over with a worried look. "You're still not letting Tom out?" John had always been permissive with the dog, but 2 months of confinement showed he was properly angry. He lost a wand and has to take responsibility. They sat in the great hall, and Daphne, proud as if she were presenting a masterpiece, produced her latest culinary experiment. She'd been studying Eastern cuisine and had even bought a set of equipment from a foreign wizard. "This is called rice noodle roll," she announced, "a kind of breakfast from the heavenly dynasty." Her pride was obvious. This time, she had succeeded spectacularly. John, who'd eaten stranger things during the term, strawberry pizza came to mind, felt hopeful. Even without much sense of taste, texture could still be familiar. Daphne lifted the lid with an expectant smile. John gaped at the chocolate-stuffed rice noodle rolls on the plate. Daphne looked puzzled. "I tried them myself. They're sweet and delicious. I got the recipe from a wizard named Chen." John stared at her, trying to contain his mix of disbelief and fury. "Could you tell me where he lives? I have some local specialties I'd like to send him." Daphne cocked her head, a little dazed. "I don't know where he lives." John let the lost opportunity go with a mental groan. He had imagined dispatching Tangmi to teach that recipe monger a lesson. Now, apparently, the scoundrel had fled. Malfoy came over, looking oddly apologetic, as if he'd done something to displease John. "John, I heard Tom lost your wand." His tone was awkward, almost like a shy girl. "It's not that serious. Why not let him out?" Since when did Malfoy care about his dog? John wondered. His expression chilled. "People who make mistakes have to be punished. I don't need to repeat that, do I?" Malfoy forced a smile and slipped away. John turned to the quiet Heinrich. Heinrich glanced elsewhere before answering. "Today is the Slytherin versus Gryffindor Quidditch final." Suddenly, everything made sense. Malfoy's quick exit had been to join his teammates. Heinrich's eyes were intent. John followed his gaze and saw the Weasley twins with their heads down. "You wouldn't be thinking of putting someone in the hospital wing before the match, would you?" John asked. Heinrich's expression turned hard. Honor mattered to him. He audibly nodded. Honor cannot be yielded. That recklessness made him seem like a Death Eater to everyone watching. John rubbed his temples. "They're Percy's younger brothers. You shouldn't do that." The idea was quashed by the Constellation Society's code of shared honor. Heinrich realized that if Percy discovered foul play, he'd have a falling out with his family. Maybe fate had a hand in settling matters as well. The day was clear and breezy, perfect for a match. Both teams retreated to the changing rooms to lay out tactics. Cedric approached with a troubled look. "Cho Chang's going to cheer for Slytherin," he said awkwardly. John shared his discomfort. Cho had been targeted by Malfoy several times this year. Asking her to cheer for Slytherin after so many fouls would look terrible. Cedric shifted, embarrassed. "We respect her choice. It's just a game. It shouldn't affect her friendships." Daphne sat back down, and Pansy slipped into the seat next to John. "The commentator's from Gryffindor," she fumed. "It'll demoralize the team." John glanced up at the commentator's booth and saw Lee Jordan, proud, loud, and notoriously partial. He leaned over to Blaise Zabini, a dark-skinned Slytherin nearby. "Blaise, could you call Ernie? I need to talk to him." Blaise, surprised John spoke to him, hurried off. Soon Ernie Macmillan from Hufflepuff came over. John led him to Professor Snape. "Professor, I think several things can affect the fairness of a match," he said earnestly. "If the commentator is biased, it isn't fair. I suggest we change who handles the commentary." He nudged Ernie forward. Ernie swallowed hard, unprepared for being thrust in front of Snape. Snape gave Ernie a cool, appraising look before answering without much emotion. "There's some truth to that. I'll discuss it with Professor McGonagall." Left in the booth, Lee Jordan paled under Snape's stare. Snape's presence was enough to make him tremble. Eventually, McGonagall agreed. Lee would be replaced if he couldn't be impartial. Both teams emerged, and all eyes turned to Harry and his broom. News of the firebolt had spread after the match with Ravenclaw. The whole school knew about it. Harry, pleased if a little vain, didn't relax. Ron puffed up with pride. We're definitely going to win. Malfoy's Nimbus 2001 can't catch the firebolt. Hermione glanced instinctively toward John. Before anybody could settle, a roar went up from the Slytherin end. The Slytherin players strode out, and leading them, smirking, was Malfoy with a brand new firebolt in his hands. Malfoy walked at the head of his team, Marcus Flint following conspicuously close. 6 Nimbus 2001s lined the pitch behind him, with one firebolt among them. It was as if Gryffindor's supposed edge had been matched. Malfoy raised an eyebrow at Harry, a silent taunt that said, "You don't have this game to yourself." Ron roared, disbelieving. Impossible! How could he have one? The mood on the Gryffindor side dropped. Their advantage, what they had counted as their trump card, was suddenly neutralized. The match now hinged almost entirely on Harry's skill and luck. The rest of Gryffindor's equipment couldn't match the 6 Nimbus 2001s arrayed against them. They could only hope Harry found the snitch. The match began in a clash of tempers and tactics. Brooms swept the air. Malfoy hovered not far from Harry, his tone insolent. "Potter, you're not the only one who gets help." He said it through gritted teeth. Why did Harry get everything? Entry to the team in his first year, a broom from McGonagall, adoration and privileges, Malfoy stewed over it all and steeled himself. He had trained hard, not relaxed through the holidays. His body had strengthened, his flying improved, and his grades had risen. He'd changed more than Harry realized. The game itself was brutal. Slytherin played dirty. Their fouls were met with the Weasley twins, Bludger's and Gryffindor's fierce defense. Oliver Wood was a formidable keeper. Even with faster brooms, Slytherin found it hard to score. Montague committed a foul on Katie Bell to prevent a shot on goal. Lee Jordan, for all his previous enthusiasms, had been edged out. His bias had been obvious, and McGonagall's grim face left no room for argument. Snape's cold authority replaced the partisan commentary with Ernie Macmillan's earnest, if nervy, voice. The change calmed things. Lee, chastened, was finally silenced. Chapter 139. Lee Jordan still wanted to get back to the commentary, but he was squeezed between the two big boys, Goyle and Crabbe, and his small frame couldn't break free. Ernie Macmillan had been a bit bewildered at first, but he was a natural chatterbox who loved being the center of attention. He soon found his footing behind the microphone. Neither Gryffindor nor Slytherin he could claim to be impartial. As the match reached its height, the golden snitch appeared. 2 pairs of eyes locked on it at once. By Muggle standards, it was like 2 top-tier sports cars revving for a drag race. The moment their gazes met, the 2 seekers shot off like red and green arrows. They pressed their brooms without hesitation, and the firebolts leapt forward. Their only target was one tiny, glittering ball. The score had been 30-80, with Slytherin ahead. Even with Wood's legendary training, 6 Nimbus 2001s, ceremonies as rigorous as Gryffindor's, Slytherin had been transformed. Victory was the only thing in their players' minds. Slytherin beater Derek aimed a bludger straight at Harry and smashed it fiercely. Harry spun his broom to dodge and caught a glimpse of the pursuer from the corner of his eye. Unwilling to be outdone, he put his shoulder to the broom and tried to put distance between himself and Malfoy. The golden snitch would decide the match. Catching it now could win the cup for Gryffindor. Wood was in his 7th year and loved Quidditch more than anything. Harry didn't want him to leave with regrets. He accelerated, weaving through the air. Greater speed brought greater danger. The snitch darted through the stands. Harry pushed down hard to keep up. Almost got it, he thought, his eyes fixed on the glittering target. Suddenly, a blunt force struck him. He frowned, ready to curse Malfoy for a dirty tactic, but Malfoy wasn't looking at him at all. There was only the snitch in the blonde boy's eyes. Wind plastered Malfoy's hair to his scalp, but he didn't care. He forced the firebolt on, accelerating like a man possessed. Harry did the same. They streaked across the sky so fast they left afterimages, and the snitch plummeted. They chased it under the familiar wooden stands, holding their breath. The structures above became obstacles, but Harry's flying was extraordinary. Whenever they threatened to collide, he always found a way to slip through. Sweat beaded on Malfoy's forehead, but he didn't dare let go of his broom to wipe it away. The wind blew the sweat toward his eyes as he hurtled forward. Students in the stands gasped, though they couldn't see the players. The fabric flapping below showed them the storm of air the two were tearing through. The two seekers were less than half a body's length apart. Harry felt himself beginning to slow and flared with anger, convinced Malfoy was pulling some trick. But then a flash of platinum blonde filled his vision. It wasn't that Harry had become slow. Malfoy had accelerated, still pushing harder on this dangerous course. Harry, unwilling to yield, sped up too. Instead of slowing, the two hurtled faster and faster beneath the stands. The snitch darted again. They were only blurred streaks chasing it. Marcus Flint watched and remembered the training scenes. Malfoy had changed then, driven to the edge, enduring work others complained about, taking on captain's duties single-handedly. If Malfoy was like that, how could they lose? Flint's eyes burned. He roared, "We are Slytherin!" He rarely behaved that passionately in a match. He usually preferred tricks. His roar lit a fire in the team. The others answered, "Noble Slytherin, we will defend our glory to the death." The 6 players roared with an indomitable spirit, nothing like the treacherous Slytherin stereotype Gryffindor loved to imagine. Katie momentarily lost focus, and Montague seized the quaffle and scored. The Slytherin stands erupted. John's voice, clear and ringing, carried across the pitch. "We rise from the mire. We crave power. We are full of ambition. We are strong and calm. We are elegant and self-possessed. We never regret. We are Slytherin." The stands fell silent. Then he continued, "We pursue glory. We defend glory. We witness glory. We are glory." Every Slytherin seemed feverish, as if watching a king, fists clenched. Then someone shouted one word, and it spread like wildfire through the green sea. "Glory! Glory! Glory! Glory!" It was madness, the cry of a single house cutting through the noise of the others. The pitch pulsed with it. The Slytherin supporters became a terrifying force. The 6 players on the field drew new strength. The score widened fast. Wood looked ravaged, unable to watch Harry's struggle. After that cry, the Slytherin team seemed ablaze. Warrington, usually a coward, took a bludger to the nose without a sound, like a zealot whose faith was that single word. Malfoy, still chasing the snitch, heard the chant and remembered the grueling training, what it had all been for glory. He stopped waiting. Malfoy pushed to full speed. The snitch dropped toward the ground. The 2 seekers dived without hesitation. How familiar that fall was. Harry plunged beside him. The whole pitch held its breath. Hermione and Ron stood up, tensely watching. The old Malfoy might have given up, but this Malfoy would not. They screamed down. 2 hands shot out for the snitch at once. Both boys were thrown from their brooms at nearly the same moment. They hit the ground, skidding and leaving 2 marks in the grass that formed a wide V. Everyone rose, necks craned. Ron muttered, "Harry, please let it be Harry." Hermione watched, terrified. Harry might be badly hurt. Students from all 4 houses stared at the 2 clasped hands. Harry's right, Malfoy's left, tangled around the tiny gold ball. Harry, shaking off the daze, clenched his fist. Then he smiled. He opened his hand and held the golden snitch high. "I caught it!" Gryffindor exploded into cheers. Slytherin's faces fell. Madam Hooch blew the final whistle. "Match over. Slytherin wins." The smiles froze. Gryffindor students stood stunned. Ron glared at Ernie Macmillan, who had been commentating. Professor McGonagall's face was pale. Snape had a satisfied smile. The scoreboard was fixed. Gryffindor 180, Slytherin 190. That 10-point difference, Montague's goal, won even at the cost of a broken nose, had decided the game. Blood still flowed from Montague's nose. No one had expected such a dramatic turn. Harry had caught the snitch, and yet Gryffindor had lost. Malfoy sat dazed on the ground at the announcement. Then his eyes cleared. He staggered to his feet, looked at Harry, and something complicated passed through his face. At last he said, "You beat me, but you can't beat Slytherin." Smiles, it seemed, don't disappear. They simply move from one person's face to another's. On the Slytherin stands, the cheers rose, deafening and triumphant. Chapter 140. The players surged toward Montague and Draco, leaping on them one by one and cheering so loudly the stands shook. Draco Malfoy looked defeated for a moment, then was suddenly pinned under 5 or 6 classmates, their voices rising in triumph. "We did it, Draco! We defended our glory! You flew so well. I was terrified when that firebolt dropped." This victory felt different from the earlier loss to Gryffindor. Instead of scorn, Malfoy was engulfed in celebration. "Yes, we won," he said, a little late, and the corners of his mouth tugged upward until he was laughing openly. Harry Potter might be Gryffindor's star, but Slytherin had its own king among the houses. The new king had failed to claim the throne. Slytherin had defended its pride. Glory to Slytherin. Dumbledore, who would hand out the awards, watched with an uncharacteristically complicated expression. His eyes lingered on the boy who had turned Slytherin's raw sand into polished green glass. The boy who would be called Slytherin's king, John Wick. Slytherin's cheers rolled from the pitch into the stands, down through the corridors and into the common room. Hogwarts pulsed with that splash of green. The word glory returned to the castle. This was Slytherin's 8th championship. Apart from the year the tournament was cancelled, they had held the cup for 7 of the previous years. It was unprecedented, and the joy was unbounded. Malfoy became the center of attention, his house badge glittering like a beacon. "John, do you see, John? We're the champions," Malfoy cried, holding the trophy aloft as his eyes swept the crowd for his friend. "He left early," Daphne told him. "He said you're shining like a star." She sounded a little disappointed. She had wanted to take John's hand and share the moment, but he had glanced at a scrap of paper and gone. Even without him, the celebration went on. Malfoy's relentless one-on-one pressure on Harry and his determined pursuit meant no one would consider it shameful that he hadn't caught the golden snitch. It was his pressure that had galvanized the team. He and Montague, the match's heroes, were tossed into the air amid whoops and laughter. John had left the stadium before the celebrations began. On the Marauders map, Crookshanks was on the move, and John already had a guess. After putting Tom in detention, he let Crookshanks slip free to meet Sirius Black. He wrote a short note on his badge, cast a disillusionment charm over himself, and followed at a distance. He didn't get too close. Sirius's defenses were sharp. Even with disillusionment as a fallback, approaching too near risked alerting him. John settled about 200 meters from the edge of the Forbidden Forest and watched. Crookshanks padded up to the forest's shadow and waited. Under the tree line, a dark shape rose. Sirius Black emerged, leaner and filthier than John remembered, matted fur and ragged clothes. He was tense, nose twitching as he caught the air and listened. John couldn't understand the exchange between dog and cat. His mind magic was minimal and touch-based, but the communications were obvious. Crookshanks received whatever he needed and darted back. John crept closer. From what he'd seen, Sirius relied on scent to navigate. The meteor shoes were currently with Luna, and new ones were still being made. John had lost the ability to fly temporarily, but that didn't hamper his stealth. He kept to the shadows and watched as Sirius worked his way through the trees and back toward the forest's edge. The man knew his survival. The edge of the forest was often safer than its depths. John smirked inwardly. Azkaban had taught him more than he'd let on. When the moment came, John acted. He wrote another line on his badge and moved upwind. He needed to blunt Sirius's advantage. From his palm, he exhaled a fog that melted into the wood smoke of the forest, appearing perfectly natural. Sirius sniffed but didn't seem alarmed. Then a dark, round object rolled quietly to the base of the tree. In the mist, it was only an outline. Then it burst. A suffocating, rancid stench flooded the area. Sirius's sensitive nose betrayed him. He gagged, eyes watering, tears streaming as the foul odor filled his sinuses. "Not good," he barked and tried to move away, but the fog obscured everything to less than 2 meters. He muttered a curse. This was no ordinary obstruction. He shifted into his dog form and bolted for cover, but John wasn't about to let him vanish. A wand raised behind a tree, and the impact hit Sirius hard in the hip, too familiar, and he rolled away, heart-pounding. The Slytherin student who had made the attack did not let him go. A spray of colored spells shot from the wand, forcing Sirius to dart and weave. His old injury in the waist slowed him. Gritting his teeth, Sirius flicked back into human form, warded off a stunning spell with his wand, and threw a curse toward his attacker. John ignored the less important exchanges and struck 3 spells in quick succession: Shield, Stunning Spell, and Expelliarmus, cycling from defense to offense. Amid the flurry, a voice broke through, raw and ragged, as if it had been pushed and then stopped. "Avada, Expelliarmus," the caster started, catching himself at the last second and finishing with the disarming charm. The Expelliarmus shot out like a crimson blossom and detonated against Sirius's back with an explosive force. The wand flew from Sirius's hand. At the same time, he was hurled through the air and smashed headfirst into a tree. Blood ran down his face. John glanced up and saw Snape standing there, wand in hand, an expression stone cold. If John hadn't heard the hesitation, if he hadn't heard that cracked, almost pronouncement, he might have believed it a slip. Snape didn't bother to hide his contempt. Sirius Black, he spat, venom in every syllable. Filthy, despicable, shameless. He paused in a smile that was almost a leer. Give me one reason, and I'll finish you here and now. John watched the head of house insult the man on the ground, then, after a moment, couldn't help but interject. He's already knocked out. Snape's face flickered as if surprised at the ease of the capture. John added, carefully, Professor, your Expelliarmus may have been a little too vigorous. He was being diplomatic. Without John there, it might have been an Avada Kedavra instead of an Expelliarmus. Snape's expression didn't change. He had done it on purpose. There was no doubt. Whenever the memory of what Sirius had done rose in his mind, Snape's hatred flared, and he would have liked nothing more than to beat him to death. I know a place we can hide him, Snape said at last. John had his own reasons for keeping Sirius butting into ministries and alliances. Sirius was a key piece in whatever plans were being arranged in the wake of Rufus Scrimgeour's rise. He played his own games, genuine in his tone. Professor, you surely wouldn't want him to slip away now, would you? Snape glanced at him, assessing. Very well. Mr. Wick, to whom will you return him? John smiled, calm. To where he belongs. Snape stared a beat longer, then used a zombie float charm on the unconscious man. Sirius rose and hovered, limp, behind them. John noted the charm's effectiveness for transporting things. As the fog thinned, the two of them carried Sirius away to a spider lair at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, a place empty of people and, importantly, outside the range of the Marauder's map. It was the perfect hiding spot.